Test.
Is it just that nice?
I don't seem to have any audio. Do others online? Are you able to hear the room?
So Aaron, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, so I turned my microphone on, but I think maybe we were waiting.
Turn us on.
Commissioner Tucker, this is Commissioner Tucker. We were trying to behave ourselves, hoping that a muted mic might actually save our careers. So thank you for pointing out that we should unmute our mics.
And
Yeah, we don't want any no hot mic moments. Thank you.
Oh my God.
Okay. About us, but okay.
Are we ready?
I think so.
We're ready. Oh, we're missing Star, but that's okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Time being 10:05 a.m. on Friday, August 11th. We will call this FTLAC meeting to order. I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here and online. We have quite a few people online also. So can we make sure that Commissioner Freeman is promoted to panelist, please? He declined. Tim, what are you doing out there? Thank you very much. Oh, I see he moved, so. Perfect. Thank you. Oh, and Commissioner Sweet is also. So John, we were hoping you would be here today. Can we promote Commissioner Sweet, please? Vice Chair Sweet. Perfect. Okay, we have called this meeting to order. I think we're going to go through and start with introductions. So let's start here in the room. I will start and we'll go clockwise if that's okay. So I am Tillamook County Commissioner Dave Yamamoto, Chair of the Council of Forest Trustland Counties and FTLAC.
Good morning, Mike Wilson, State Forest Division Chief.
Mike Buffo, Senior Forest Economist, Mason, Bruce, and Gerard.
Tyson Weprick, Adaptive Management Specialist with State Forests.
Good morning, Nick Palazzotto, Biological Support Unit Manager for State Forests.
Good morning, Ron Zilli, Deputy Division Chief, State Forests.
Good morning, Samantha Hoffman, Executive Support for State Forest, and Mike Wilson.
Good morning, Justin Buttress, Policy Analyst in the State Forest Division.
Will Tucker, Lynn County Commissioner.
Margaret Magruder, Columbia County Commissioner, inviting you all to come to the Polk County 4-H FFA auction tomorrow at 10.
I just need to interrupt there and tell you that the Tillamook County Fair is going on as we speak.
No.
Sorry.
Brandon Persinger, Natural Resources for the Association of Oregon Counties and Executive Director for the Council of Forest Trustland Counties.
Courtney Bangs, Clatsop County Commissioner.
And let's, oh, sorry, over here, please.
Good morning, Don Everingham, ODF Northwest Oregon Area Director.
Hi, Laura Wilkeson with Hampton Lumber.
Good morning, Robbie Lefebvre, Assistant Area Director for Northwest, but today I'm acting as the Forest Grove District Forester.
Thank you. And since those online maybe don't have the participant list, I will call your name. And if you could introduce yourself, please. Chair Kelly.
Tim Kelly, Chair of Board of Forestry.
Thank you for being here, Chair Kelly. And I'm just going down my list. So Commissioner Sweet.
John Sweet, Coos County Commissioner.
State Forester Mukamoto.
Cal Mukamoto, State Forester for Oregon.
Good morning. Commissioner Miller.
Morning, everyone. Casey Miller, Commissioner, Lincoln County.
Thank you for being here. Commissioner Scar.
Good morning, Erin Scar, Tillamook County Commissioner, and I am here today because I'm going to spend the afternoon at the fair. So everybody come on out.
Go Pig and Ford, right?
Yeah, 5:30 every day. Don't miss it.
Great. And Commissioner Freeman.
Tim Freeman, Douglas County Commissioner.
Thank you, Tim, for being here today. And I'll go down the list of attendees also, and I'm just going to go down my list. Casey Kula. Oh, I'm sorry. So they're attendees, so they don't have the ability. Sorry.
Right.
So should we go through the list or do we need to do that?
I don't.
They're just attendees.
Yeah.
Okay. And not just attendees. I apologize for that. Thank you everyone for being online today with us. Okay, so with that, we're going to ask for public comment. And I believe, hold on just a moment. I believe we have some. Thank you for that. Laura, please come up.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to provide some comments. So today I just wanted to provide some basic information about how timber sales are administered.
So for the record, you are.
Oh, sorry. For the record, my name is Laura Wilkeson. I work for Hampton Lumber. So just some basic information on how timber sales are administered. So ODF's timber sale contracts are for 3 years. Contracts almost always include some sort of project work, mostly road building, decommissioning, and stream crossing improvements. Most sales have multiple harvest units, requiring logistical planning of that project work and harvest over the duration of the contract. Usually road work is done in the first year since the contract has that 3-year window, and road work can only be done from about late spring through summer. So harvest is actually done after the road work is finished. There's also usually some work to be done after the harvest is completed, either for site prep for reforestation, finishing of roads and other project work, even some recreational improvements. Purchasers are usually planning for harvests about a year or two in advance to ensure that our mills have a steady supply of logs. ODF requires actually a midpoint payment for timber sales. This means that many times we are paying for logs that we haven't actually harvested yet. This provides revenue to ODF and the counties in a predictable and sustainable manner. ODF has the authority to allow contract term extensions of green sales when restoration work is needed in other places, and has done so, like after the 2020 Labor Day fires. ODF allowed purchasers to defer a green sale if we purchased a salvage sale in order to get to that wood before it deteriorated, which is really the right thing to do to support restoration of the forest. We appreciate ODF's flexibility and believe that we are partners when it comes to managing state forest lands with the departments. We're also proud to know that the revenue generated from these sales that we purchase go to benefit the communities that we operate in and have very deep roots in. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that. And Commissioner, please.
So we're in our third fire in 2 weeks, and I wanted to just publicly express my thanks to State Forester Makamoto and the ODF fire teams, and to make sure that Chair Kelly does know that we greatly appreciate ODF fire, and that we don't want fires in our forest, but if I have a fire, I want ODF to be there. And in the case of this last fire, Wiley, which is the one that's growing right now, you guys brought a lot of resources, air, and bringing people, and the fire was pretty much contained on U.S. Forest Service land, but the ranger asked for and got, and I greatly appreciate the flexibility of Chad Calderwood and others. That you guys have got some great professional teams there, and I greatly appreciate the response we have, and appreciate that we so far have not lost a structure yet, and we haven't, but it's within less than a mile of homes. It's less than a mile and a half from a state highway. It is, and it's only 5 miles to the downtown, but within about a quarter mile of residential developments, and start going into the town of Sweet Home, including senior care facilities, a clinic, which we haven't even cut the ribbon on yet. It is scary to look at when you drive up there to go to the fire site. But again, I want to just note and greatly my appreciation of your team coming in early, taking on this fire and leading the effort with the feds and private timber, and they're all out there. But it's your team out of Sweet Home, your team out of Salem here that has been carrying the lion's share, and I thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner, please.
I just wanted to follow up on the fire conversation, mainly because I donate my husband every year to the cause. But looking at the draft EIS appendix 3.2, fires are expected to be more frequent, more intense, and larger. Some areas are likely to burn repeatedly. Continuation of current conditions would suggest 35% of the plan area is likely to burn over the analysis period. Given the added severity and extent of fires predicted with climate change, the actual extent of likely burning is significantly larger under the new draft HCP. So I just wanted to put that out there. I also appreciate ODF's response, but in the same hand, I feel like decisions are being made that might not be good for our future. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that very much. Let's go online. Any commissioners have any comments you would like to make at this point? Seeing none, we're going on to the Board of Forestry Chair and State Forester. Let's start with, sorry. Didn't I just ask that? I think I did. So
Do people know how? Yeah, I don't know if people know how to do it, but if you wish to make a public comment, please raise your hand so that you can be promoted to a panelist.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's the part I forgot. So going to attendees, if anyone has a public comment that you would like to make, please raise your hand and we will promote you to an attendee so that we can hear and see you. Anyone? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask one more time for the attendees, any of the commissioners that would like to make a comment at this point? Seeing none, I'm going to turn this over to Chair Jim Kelly, Chair Kelly.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. Let's see. And also, if anybody wants to come to the Grant County 4-H sale, that's tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And if I look a little bleary eyed, I've been up every night in the middle of the night chasing elk out of our fields. But okay, other than that, I just want to, let everyone know that working hard to try to find a way that we can unite this board around this HCP, and I have nothing to announce at this point, but certainly am attempting to get us to a place that would be in the tradition of the Oregon way. That seems long lost. Anyhow, that's I won't be able to say more than that, and I look forward to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Chair Kelly. Let's move on to State Forester Mukomoto. Cal.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Summer is here, and so is fire season. As ODF has to focus on a lot of different things, but right now our focus is being largely focused on wildfire suppression. And we started the fire season out in a big bang with the Flat Fire, which was federal, and our Golden Fire down in Klamath, which our team, Type 1 team, went down there and really did a great job in participation with local resources and the communities. Right now, thank you, Commissioner Tucker. I appreciate the kind words about ODF, but I'll tell you, our South Cascade district has really been facing it. Many challenges with 5 major fires on both federal and private lands, and with ones that we have some of those fires by the tail. We feel pretty confident about them, but we are not out of the woods. When I talk to my weather people, they say this weekend's going to increasing temperatures, higher chances of dry lightning. So when I look across the state, I see a lot of potential for large wildfires. So right now, I'm just going to say this from the State Forester's Chair, everyone needs to be extremely careful to prevent wildfires. With the current conditions, just one spark, cigarette, or open flame could result in Oregon's next big wildfire. So as we always say, only you can prevent forest fires, and we're going to lean on you. And with your bully pulpit as commissioners, I'm going to ask you to bring that message across as we enjoy these state fairs. And does anyone, not state fairs, county fairs, excuse me, but did anybody have any presidential candidates eating fried Oreos at any of your group? Okay, with that said, I'll end, and thank you, David Yamamoto.
Thank you for that, Cal. I'm going to take a chair's prerogative and back up just a little bit and make a quick opening remark. Hope nobody minds. This is kind of a bittersweet moment for me. I made an announcement a week and a half ago at the end of our board meeting. I am going to be retiring, taking early retirement as Tillamook County Commissioner. Yeah. I appreciate that very much. It is time for me to retire. My wife really wants to do some traveling, and it's been almost impossible to take more than a week at a time. It was a very, very difficult decision. I will not be leaving until probably right around the end of the year, either the end of November, end of December. We are working on a process as we speak, and I think maybe a press release might be coming out of Tillamook County on Monday as to exactly how this process for replacing me is going to work. We've scoured over all of the state rules and regs, been in contact with the Secretary of State's office. And so there is a process in place. And so we will be following this. This will be a very transparent, open, public process. What's going to happen is probably within the next week or so, we will open a period for people to write a letter of interest to the Board of Commissioners. in Tillamook County. And we'll start from there to see how many people really have an interest. It is my hope that we find someone with a good background in natural resources, timber, dairy, and fishing, so that they can kind of carry on what I have done. But there are no promises out there. There are not. And again, it's not something that I am looking forward to leaving. I enjoy this job immensely, but it is time. And so I just wanted to make that announcement. And my time is not done yet. I still have some issues that I would like to bring further along to fruition. I have a couple that I think we're doing pretty well on, a couple that we still need more work on. So again, I just wanted to make that announcement since it was public a week and a half or so ago. So thank you for that. I appreciate the time. Okay, with that, let's move on in our agenda. We're looking at an update to the forest management plan, and we're going to turn that over to Mike Wilson. Mike.
Thank you, Commissioner Yamamoto. And I'll just say, I don't know that we can replace you. We can find somebody to fill that seat, probably, but congratulations actually on being able to do that.
Thank you.
All right. So again, for the record, my name is Mike Wilson. I serve as a State Forest Division Chief. And today we want to provide a brief overview of the Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan. For anyone who may be new to the project, and make sure that everybody's caught up on the work we've been doing and what we have planned for the year ahead. And next slide, please. I'm glad we haven't had any time over the last few years to get used to the technology. It's kind of funny how that happens.
Got to reboot.
That's all right. Meeting's over.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here. I did see a movie. Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Okay. So, yeah, all right, before we launch into the forest management plan details, I would like to reiterate the reason that we're here. The reason we're pursuing a new forest management plan is our transition to a habitat conservation plan. And regardless of the final nature of that habitat conservation plan, currently we function under take avoidance. So we avoid take of listed species pursuant to Section 9 of the federal ESA. And as a public landowner, we're trying to manage for all these social, economic, and environmental values. But having to enact those protections, it's costly and inefficient. We basically end up having to do operational surveys to make sure that we essentially clear our management activities. And before we're able to actually implement them, they may get interrupted if we find new species. And at the very least, it requires a certain timeline. The surveys expire after a while, their validity. And so, it really hampers our ability to have the flexibility that we need. The other thing is we don't have any immunity lawsuits. I think we all realize that at this point, given the number that we faced over the last few years. And then we're also looking at increasing species listings over time, which would bring additional encumbrances encumbrances, increasing restrictions, both associated with perhaps increased listings, but also even existing species currently just having the restrictions increased as species perhaps to continue to decline. So the advantage of the incidental take permit, it allows us to have, it's not for free, but it does have a deliberate planned conservation component to it. There's still some survey work and other monitoring that goes on there, However, it's focused and it can be effective because you're actually looking at not only your compliance monitoring for the activities you're doing, but effectiveness monitoring for how you're trying to improve things. So it's meaningful. When we go out and survey a timber sale, just to survey a timber sale so we know we can cut it, that just isn't an efficient use of money. It's a requirement. But when we can do monitoring pursuant to a specific conservation plan, then that's money well spent. So anyway, the goal of the habitat conservation plans ultimately is to avoid, minimize, and mitigate the impacts to species. Our current habitat conservation plan draft covers 17 species and would provide sort of this operational certainty for 70 years. So I think everybody here is pretty familiar with that aspect. So I think we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So sort of in alignment with that HCP, this FMP, we need to have our current FMP works with take avoidance. It's a different context. It's a different paradigm. So we need to shift to accommodate that. There's the geographic and policy context for the new FMP. The geographic context is the same as for the draft HCP, which is about 640,000 acres of ODF managed lands west of the crest of the Cascades. And that includes 614,000 acres of Board of Forestry lands and 26,000 acres of common school lands. So if approved, the Western Oregon State Forest Management Plan would replace the current management plan for both Northwest and Southwest Oregon. We actually have a separate management plan currently for Southwest, and also the Elliott management plan that's kind of still out there. It would all be rolled together. So we had in this plan area over time historically three forest management plans. We'll be rolling them into one. So in the policy context there, the management plan is the context there that we're developing. It is the revised Oregon statutes, ORS Chapter 530, which describes the state forester's management of both Board of Forestry and common school forest lands. Oregon Administrative Rule, specifically OAR 629 Division 35, which further defines the social, economic, and environmental benefits that constitute greatest permanent value and describes our planning process to achieve them. Nick is going to provide further detail later on how our forest management classification, how our management plans speak to the greatest permanent value, first of all, and then how we're also using our forest land management classification system, which is part of those planning rules, to describe how that plays out on the landscape. So, yes.
Move on. I think Commissioner Banks had a question or a comment.
Sure.
I just had a comment on the first slide that you showed at the last statement where it provides certainty for 70 years. And I would say that it does not provide operational certainty for 70 years, mainly because there are 17 species listed, but that doesn't take into account other species that could be listed. And so as per what Washington is currently facing, a continuance of lawsuits in regards to their operations, I do not foresee Oregon being exempt from that in their future, as per the butterfly situation of the Willamette Valley, that the current concerns that the Willamette Valley is facing in regards to butterflies. So I just contest that final statement. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you want questions during this presentation? Or would you prefer we waited until the end?
I think asking the questions as they're pertinent to the conversations could be best.
Okay, thank you.
So is that okay with you, Mike? I mean,
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so the FMP, along with the HCP, establishes the policy sideboards within which we create the more detailed plans to achieve greatest permanent value, which is that blend of social, economic, and environmental outcomes on behalf of all Oregonians. But so what's shown here at a high level, simplified level, is a way of visualizing the scope and scale of our various planning levels. So the HCP represents ESA compliance for the 17 covered species. And board adoption of the HCPs and incidental take permits are basically their policy for state forests for the Endangered Species Act compliance component. And that's specific to that. And so while the HCP provides that, the FMP really sets the goals for all of the for the management of the forest overall, many other forest resources, and constitutes it's currently formally adopted as Oregon Administrative Rule as well. So it constitutes the board's finding of GPV. They basically are saying this plan can meet GPV. And that's how they adopt it. The forest management plan goals are distilled further into more discrete objectives through implementation plans that are geographically discrete and time-bound. So currently that's decadal objectives for us. And I think folks are probably fairly familiar with our implementation plan process, but that's where every 10 years, we set a new annual harvest objective. We make any adjustments to our landscape design for desired future condition and so forth. The process will look a little bit different going forward. And the HCP certainly, has its own piece of that as well. But the basic process of having implementation plans will remain the same. And finally, specific operational plans. Currently, they're annual operations plans. We are considering potentially, using perhaps, using every 2 years instead of every year as we go forward. Not sure about that, but those are the plans where we have the operational detail. We're going to have timber sales in there. We're going to have recreation. We're going to have all the things that we actually have upcoming that are going on. And each of these.
I just have a question. Why are we doing everything backwards? Because the HCP is yet to be approved by the board, but yet we've had IPs released and we're working on an FMP. And so I feel like everything is in its reverse order, and it doesn't seem like a good plan to be going backwards or inside out. Everything is being structured according to this HCP, but it's yet to be approved.
So I'll agree with you. There's a lot going on right now. And it would be nice to have more time and basically order these things out a little bit better. There is a lot going on, and that is the situation that we have. The reason that we are making adjustments currently is because we do expect those incidental take permits to happen in the very near future. And we need to be prepared to implement those when they happen.
So you're saying that the HCP will go through in the new year and it will happen. And so the decision is not the board's decision?
So we are at the board's direction working on the HCP, and we are working on it with the expectation that, yes, we will complete the NEPA process. We'll have incidental take permits. Whatever adjustments or anything else that happens in the interim, we'll roll with that as well. But we certainly are not in a position right now to, we've been given the board direction to work on it. And so I guess that's still what we expect. Yes.
So I just want to make a comment there also. And so do we have an update on the timing of when the board may approve the HCP?
I think we can get to that a little bit later, if that's okay, when we talk about the modeling update, because I believe the board is very interested in seeing the numbers that come out of this. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the schedule of that then, if that's all right.
And that's fine. I do want to go back to Chair Kelly's comment at the beginning of this meeting, where he mentioned something about trying to unite the Board of Forestry around the HCP. And so that kind of tells me also that I'm not sure what's going on with the HCP at this point. So I am a little concerned also.
Okay.
Thank you.
To wrap up here, so all of these planning levels are actually subject to their own public comment periods. But however, we always strive to provide additional information and engagement opportunities as well through various means. Okay, next slide. So I would like to
Like, sorry, I have a quick question. You said each one of those are available for public comment. Is that the standard like 30 days public comment period? So each one of those items would be available for public comment for 30 days?
They actually vary a little bit.
Okay.
So the FMP specifically in public comment, you can of course, the board hears a lot about that as time goes on. So there's multiple periods there that people can come and offer, or multiple occasions that people can offer that comment. The rulemaking itself has public comment associated with it. And Justin, that is?
It's at least 30 days, but it's not really prescribed specifically, but
Okay. So it's a minimum of 30 days.
it's 30, yeah.
And our implementation plans also have I believe it's 30-day, correct, comment period. I always get this stuff mixed up.
Yeah, they have an initial period that's slightly longer. And I think when we approve a new FMP, like we did the first time, there was a longer period, and then it was for adjustments, it was shorter. So I think it
Right.
was, yeah.
And that was specified in the FMP that we would have that first FMP have a longer comment period. So yeah, the initial IP was a little bit longer. Whether that's the case or not with this one, I guess we still need to decide. And then our annual operations plans have is it a 45-day, Ron? Thanks.
Correct, 45 days.
So why no public comment on the management approach chapter? Why did ODF go that direction?
So why not public comment?
On the management approach chapter.
So there, again, multiple opportunities to come to the Board of Forestry about that. And then the intended public comment period for the forest management plan would be on the full draft management plan during rulemaking and any board engagements where you want to make public comment on that up to that point as well.
So there's no organized public comment cycle, 30 days, 45 days for the management approach is basically what I'm asking.
For that chapter
That
alone?
chapter.
No.
Thank you. And
Ask a follow-up question related to that. So on the draft document that we have that's out on the website now, that public comment period on that whole draft document is still in the future.
Yeah, the rulemaking public comment period is in the future. Yes. And so under the way we currently do this planning, the board will, we're going to present to them in September. We don't necessarily expect them to provide us direction. It's an information item. And likely they won't until they see the modeled outcomes and the range of possibility there. But at some point they will direct us to move into rulemaking with the plan, and that's what we will do. And that starts, in that process, there's that official public comment period. Now, any time leading up to that at a board meeting, there's the open public comment period as one thing. And then there also, of course, is this body's time on the agenda to present specific testimony as well.
So comments today can help inform you and the board comment around this group, and then also
Right.
In the board meeting itself.
Yeah, I mean, especially at board meetings during FTLAC's specific comment period in terms of this body. Yes.
Thanks.
I just want to point out, the Department of Forestry is relying on Board of Forestry as the entity to take public comment, and then also this body for you to have some public comment. Board of Forestry meetings are typically not every 30 days. So if the comment period is only for 30 days or 45 days, but after the October Board of Forestry meeting, the board isn't planning on taking public comment until it looks like their January meeting, that's significantly more than 30 days. So is there a possibility? I don't know what your guys' timeline is, right? But if you're planning on taking public comment, is there the ability to submit public comment in some way, shape or form if there isn't a Board of Forestry meeting within that 30-day window.
So people, yes, and so first of all, there's the invited written testimony that has certain timeframes around any specific meeting. In addition to that, people often submit comments to the board just through the general board email address on a variety of topics, sort of all the time. And we do keep those comments as well. But so in terms of the 30 days, though, I mean, that would exist in any official public comment periods on any of those planning levels are going to exist even outside of a board meeting, right? Those are the comments on a rule or implementation plan or annual operations plans.
Right. So I guess my point was the public would need to know that they can submit written comment and there isn't necessarily a verbal comment ability because you're relying on the verbal comments to only be at the Board of Forestry meetings.
Perhaps if I may, Justin Buttress, Policy Analyst in State Forest Division for the record. So when we're doing a rulemaking, we have to follow the Administrative Procedures Act. And the Administrative Procedures Act prescribes that we have a public comment period that's notified through various venues. We have to notify the legislature. We have to notify certain news outlets. And anyone who signed up as an interested party to know about rulemakings for the department. So that goes out. We will establish in that a timeline for what the public comment period is and establish public hearings. Those all become part of the record that goes to the Board of Forestry, in this case, as part of the rulemaking. So if someone comes to the hearing and makes oral comment, those do go to the board just through a different venue. And that's standard through the rulemaking process.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I guess my point was I just wanted to make sure that there was on record the ability that there will be a verbal public comment period available if it falls outside of those Board of Forestry scheduled meetings. So I appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So goals and strategies have a public comment period. Management does not. Can we add an organized public comment for management?
So we collected, we had a series of informational sessions and we did collect feedback on the goals and strategies. There was not an official public comment period on goals and strategies. And now we have a fully formed draft forest management plan that we'll be presenting to the board in September. And so all aspects of that plan can receive testimony at board meetings, any and all board meetings and any and all public comment associated with it moving forward into being an approved plan.
So then with all of that, when is the vote going to go forward for rulemaking for the FMP then?
That remains to be determined. However, we'll talk about the modeling schedule towards the end of the presentation and how we expect that to roll out and be apparent to the board. And I do not expect that the board would ask us to move forward with the forest management plan until they've seen those modeled outcomes.
Thank you, Mike.
So on the slide, we can see, there's a number of things that we have had in our engagement up to this point. Of course, we always have our ongoing engagement with you, which we really appreciate. And we did have a concerted effort around tribal coordination. Basically the indigenous people of these lands have applied their management practices and adapted to change on the landscape since time immemorial, and they have a rich traditional ecological knowledge that ODF values and seeks to incorporate into our stewardship. And later in this presentation, Nick is going to speak to the reciprocity of humans to the forest and the ecosystem services dynamic. And that will really reflect, nothing really reflects that more than the tribe's relationships with the lands. To date, we've have conducted 6 tribal work group meetings with the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon to develop the FMP cultural resources and goals, resource goals and strategies. And collaboration is ongoing and will continue as we implement the FMP over time. We also had 5 meetings open to the public to keep people informed. Several joint joint stakeholder meetings, FMP strategies, public feedback, where we did have a lot of folks, give us their feedback on the goals and strategies. Board of Forestry engagement, we've presented them the draft management approach and the draft goals and strategies, and then our state partner engagement. We've had ongoing meetings with other partner agencies in state government. Okay, next slide.
Commissioner
yeah,
Tucker,
well,
before you go on, so I don't know quite where to put this, but I look at that slide we just had on the screen, and I see that it talks about the engagement, and then below that was the tribal one, and I really appreciate the draft FMP having the land acknowledgement piece. That was great. I have a history that has some tribal connections, and I appreciate when you do that, because those lands were first managed by somebody else. But I would almost want to ask that as they have a collaboration role versus an engagement role that you have defined for us, I'd love to see us, one, do an land acknowledgement to the counties, because these were county lands. And I think of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I don't always feel as included as I would like, even as a commissioner sitting representing a region on this body. And so I look at the last slide where it talked about engagement, and yes, you've had to put up with us, but I'm not sure that I feel like it's been a collaboration. And so but I do think that I'd ask you to consider some sort of comment about the history of the lands, a little bit about the fact that these were in fact lands that counties gave in what we thought was a partnership or a trust relationship, whatever you want to call it, because they've been called different things by different judges over time. But there is a piece where we feel a connection to this land, maybe not as rich as the tribal members do, but I would love to see an acknowledgement of the county's role. And engagement, I wish wasn't the word that was there, but wish it was a stronger term than engagement, because it might look like we've agreed, supported, endorsed, and I'm not sure that I've taken that vote. Thank you, sir.
thank you. Thank you for that comment. Well, I appreciate that.
And just one follow-up. So I pulled up, you had 70 attendees for the FMP HCP meeting on August 10th, 22 on August 18th, 54 for the goals survey that you took. And now we have the FTLAC meeting. And I guess my question is does my voice count as one person, or does my voice count as 42,000?
So your voice as a body counts in your, you have a special place in that advisory capacity to the board.
Okay, because
And
my elected position is an elected position to represent an entire county. And so I'm here because they've delegated me to be here to represent that entire county and its interests. And so I guess my curiosity is do I need to show up at each of these meetings and repeat myself, or is my voice being heard as the voice of 42,000? I guess that's just my question. You might not be able to answer that, but that's my question.
well, I can assure you that your voice is being heard. Okay, but no, in all seriousness, it is important, and we understand the difference, the significance of elected officials coming forward and presenting those opinions, and that really is regardless of the specific venue and the specific context. But what I do really anchor into is, there is a relationship between, again, going back to what Commissioner Tucker just said in terms of where these lands came from and why there's this established body as well to advise the board on policy matters.
And I apologize, but that sparks me to respond a little bit, because when you talk about us getting connected to the board, I'm not sure that I feel that same connection. We're given such a short period of time that not wanting to have my going and attending and speaking disrupt the testimony of this united body. But I don't feel like, I would love to see Board of Forestry members present at our Forest Trust Lands Committee meetings. I would love to see and feel like there is word engagement, because I don't feel that. I feel like there's actually a filter that summarizes and adds a flavor that I don't always necessarily think is what was my intention or the intention of this body, because we don't often take votes. We receive information, we respond. I think you have a sense of where we feel about the chosen modeling ideas and chosen plan pieces that are in the HCP. But I don't know that I would tell you that it's the one I would want to be there. And I don't certainly support the numbers that are there. So I thank you, and I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Tucker. We have a hand up from Commissioner Freeman. Tim.
Good morning, everybody. I try to remain pretty quiet during these meetings. I focus a lot of my efforts on ONC lands because that's a big player here in Douglas County. But when we start talking about this process thing, I have to speak up. Oftentimes it feels like this process is that we're told we have a special place. We are presented the information, our input's listened to, but at the end of the day, nothing changes. Our input is not, doesn't make its way into any action. And again, I think you've heard, I mean, I've been on lots of these calls on these meetings, that the direction that the department's going is not supported by the commissioners of the counties these lands are in. And to continue just sort of checking the box, oh, well, we engage the commissioners, we talk to them, we give them information, then turn around and act like somehow that means we support what's going on is extremely frustrating. And that's probably enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Commissioner. Any other comments? Michael, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, so to keep moving here, I'm just, I think that was it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Nick, and he's going to talk more about the details of the draft FMP.
Okay, thanks, Mike. For the record, Nick Palazzotto, Biological Support Unit Manager, State Forest. So we thought it would be worthwhile to spend a little time reviewing the components of the FMP. There are 4 chapters listed there on the screen. And so chapter 1 is basically just an introduction. It describes the purpose and scope of the plan. It includes the guiding principles, the lands covered by the plan. I think there's some history there, but we could probably revisit that. And how it relates to other plans and processes. It also describes a few major plan themes that are addressed throughout the document. And these themes are greatest permanent value, diversity, equity, and inclusion, climate change, sustainability, and adaptive management. Chapter 2 is the management approach that Commissioner Bangs just referenced. It provides a vision for how the management of resources is integrated across the landscape to sustainably deliver a diverse array of benefits to Oregonians. Chapter 3 are the forest resources and the goals and strategies associated with them. It provides a description of the current condition of those resources to provide context for management. And it also includes the plan's goals and strategies. Goals, just for clarity, goals are what ODF intends to achieve for each forest resource in the planning area, whereas strategies describe how ODF will manage the forest and resources and identify managed techniques that the state forester may use to achieve the plan's goals. Chapter 4 is the guidelines. It states general guidelines for asset management, for plan implementation and revision. And it also contains the guidelines for adaptive management and public engagement. Okay, so I think all of us here are pretty familiar with greatest permanent value.
Ask a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious. So kind of going back to the themes. And so I guess I'm curious about the difference between managing for greatest permanent value and then managing for example, climate change. Is that separate than managing for greatest permanent value? And so how is that?
Not anymore. I mean, there's a lot of linkages among the themes. Obviously, climate change and sustainability as well. There's some overlap there. In today's, given our understanding of the current state of the science and where things are headed, it's hard to think about providing for greatest permanent value without incorporating, climate change and uncertainty, right?
It sounds like you're saying they're kind of one and the same. Is that
Climate change is great? No,
you have to manage for climate change to achieve greatest permanent value? Is that
in managing for greatest permanent value, you must, or we're suggesting that we will consider how climate change would affect our ability to continue to provide for greatest permanent value.
Okay. I'm trying to just understand how, because they're called out separately, kind of 5 things called out separately. And I believe the requirement of this plan is to provide for management and greatest permanent value. And so this plan seems like it has themes that are either outside of greatest permanent value or are actually just a portion of what it means to manage for greatest permanent value. So
yeah, they're not intended to replace or substitute for supplant greatest permanent value. They supplement the provision of greatest permanent value. The current plan, the 2010 plan only references climate change a couple times. I think it actually uses the word once or twice. And so moving forward with a plan revision, we felt and given our the climate change and carbon plan that's agency wide, we felt like we needed to demonstrate how the forest management plan for managing for greatest permanent value will incorporate these themes.
So I guess I'm just going to be a little bit more blunt. Is there any verbiage that pulls out economics in regards to the GPV in the FMP plan? Is there any direct comments that say we recognize the economics, the importance, the social importance of the economics? And just to be, because I see a theme and economics is not that theme of the FMP. And so I'm just wondering, did I miss something? Is there some specific verbiage that says?
Yeah, yes, there are, both in the management approach itself and in the strategies or the goals rather specifically for the timber resource, but also for others as well. I'll touch on it a little, I think, as I move through this, and then we can circle back on that. Okay, so greatest permanent value as defined in rule or statute rather says, healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems that over time and across the landscape provide a full range of social, economic, and environmental benefits to the people of Oregon. So we thought we'd break that down a little bit, sort of tease apart the phrasing there. And so the phrase healthy, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems places emphasis on functional systems and sustainability, which today includes consideration of climate change and its effects on health and productivity. Over time and across the landscape is an acknowledgement that it takes time to get there and that the whole landscape is involved. And a full range of social and economic benefits is a broad mandate indeed, one that requires consideration of trade-offs at many scales. Finally, to the people of Oregon is also a broad mandate. It speaks to the importance of incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion considerations into the division's approach to management. This is our common ground. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the next few slides, I'll give a brief primer on our proposed approach to management under the new FMP. The management approach is intended to provide, this is chapter 2 now, provide for a vision of what management will look like across the forest during implementation and what the public will see on the landscape when visiting the forest over time. It's a relatively high-level vision for management across the forest to achieve greatest permanent value and address the other major FMP themes of sustainability, which includes providing a sustainable and predictable flow of timber and of revenue to the states, counties, and local taxing districts. Climate change, which with an emphasis on promoting resilient forests for the future. Diversity, equity, and inclusion with an emphasis on underserved communities, and adaptive management, which is our pathway for testing new ideas and adjusting to changing conditions. The management approach is not intended to provide instructions for implementation to the field. Those reside in the goals and strategies or in our policies and in the implementation plans. What it does do, what it tries to do is provide a landscape context to address how different areas are managed for different objectives, and the forest as a whole provides for greatest permanent value. Thank you. And so one way to think about ecosystem function and the related social, economic, and environmental benefits to people is in terms of ecosystem services. And here we use the term ecosystem services as described in the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which is a UN-led global analysis that began in the early 2000s and is ongoing. And so under that framework, ecosystem services can be categorized into 4 groups. The first is our provisioning services. And these are resources that the forest ecosystems provide, and they include goods such as food, fuel, and timber. So yes, to be clear, timber is an ecosystem service. Other forest products, mineral resources, and also services such as clean air and water and revenue for the state and our county partners. It's also important to note that in this framework, timber and economic benefits to local communities are not incompatible with these other values or benefits. They're part of the many services that the forest provides for Oregonians. Next up are regulating services. These forests forests in general help regulate many resources, including water, climate, and carbon. Supporting services, forest ecosystems support the function of many important systems and processes, including nutrient cycling and soil formation, primary productivity, and biodiversity. And finally, cultural services. Forests provide for recreational, aesthetic, spiritual, and scientific benefits and values as numerous and diverse as the people that use them.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Go for it.
I would like cultural services to also incorporate the culture of the community that these lands are in and the jobs provided. You know, since Clatsop County was founded, it's been a logging community. Granted, it's not our only identity, but I feel like that is a very big cultural idea.
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate that. And I made a note. We'll circle back on it. Okay, so thus ecosystem services, this concept includes all of the social, economic, and environmental benefits that are required under greatest permanent value or otherwise desired by the public. And here, specific examples of that are carbon storage and drinking water, neither of which are defined in greatest permanent value.
Nick, can I stop you there? I think we have a hand up from Vice Chair Commissioner Sweet. John.
Thank you. I was going to make kind of the same comments that Courtney made. So thank you for doing that, Courtney. I'll take my hand down.
Thank you, John.
Okay, next slide. Was that Tim? Do I see Commissioner Freeman's hand up as well?
I don't believe Commissioner Freeman ever put his hand down.
Okay. Okay.
Neither did John.
They reserve the right to speak again. Okay, so in addition to identifying many important outcomes that contribute to community well-being, the concept of ecosystem services creates a framework that recognizes how social and economic needs are supported by healthy ecosystems and how society in turn provides services to those ecosystems by supporting their functions. So that this diagram attempts to illustrate that reciprocal nature of our relationship to the forest ecosystem and the importance of active management, which is a key tenet of greatest permanent value, to protect, maintain, and enhance those ecosystem services. And as Mike mentioned earlier, this reciprocity is well represented by the deep relationship that tribes have with the land. Also represented, I would suppose, by the local community's longstanding historic relationships to the land as well. So on the left side, you have of this figure, you have ecosystem services to Oregonians, and the right side lists many of the services humans provide to ecosystems, including cultural and natural resource stewardship, habitat restoration, pest management, and reforestation strategies. And so this isn't to imply that forest management is just about ecological function, but ecological function is key to the sustainable provision of these services through time. And this is particularly relevant within the context of climate change and promoting resilience in managed forests. So under this new forest management plan, we will use what we are calling an ecologically sustainable approach to forest management. The term comes from existing literature, in particular, a 2012 paper by international team of scientists that frames retention forestry in this context. And retention forestry is it's a silvicultural technique. It's a tool. It's a type of harvest. It's something that we incorporate in our overall regime, but it's a bit of a subset. This table presented here is adapted from their work, and it's modified to reflect state forest considerations. And so an ecologically sustainable approach is about ecosystem services and about promoting resilience to address uncertainty and risk. The approach to forest management is to sustain and support the ecological integrity and productivity of the forest, and thereby improve resilience and capacity to adapt to change over time. And key to this approach is active management for multiple values at multiple scales. This figure is intended to illustrate how ecologically sustainable forest management can be used to promote healthy, resilient, productive, and sustainable forest ecosystems by managing at multiple scales. And so on the left, we have conservation areas to ensure habitat protection. These are distributed across the landscape, which improves resilience and function. In the middle, we reference some of the considerations for landscape management. These include compositional and structural diversity, which are both important components of resilient forests, as well as habitat connectivity and the location of harvest units and roads. On the right, we list some stand level considerations, so scaling down, and these include young stand management, types of harvest, biological legacy retention, and pest management. And these are by no means exhaustive lists, but through consideration of these multiple values at multiple scales, we work to ensure sustainable provision of greatest permanent value and the associated ecosystem services. And timber and economic benefits to local communities are ecosystem services. And in our business model, timber revenue is the primary vehicle to pay for all of these other services. This is not in conflict with this management approach. It's just important context for state forest management. And I say that because the concept of ecologically sustainable forest management can look different on different ownerships, whether it be state, federal, private, fed, non-fed, et cetera. It can look different contingent on the mandates for that land base.
This is the second time I've heard a similar presentation, and I kept my notes from the previous presentation. And we talk about the economics and we talk about timber revenue and the importance of the revenue. ODF is the only agency in the state of Oregon that I know of that creates revenue. And if we're not continuing to grow that revenue, what happens to all of the other services? This is from your previous presentation. Timber revenue is the method to pay for other services. If we don't have increased timber revenue, how are we going to continue to pay for the governor's plans of homelessness, housing, drug and alcohol treatment? How are we going to pay for all those things if we're having to support the Department of Forestry? I'm just so concerned about that, and nobody seems to have a very good answer. And this is a marvelous document. It really is. I don't want to be critical in any way, but if you were doing your master's thesis or your doctorate, there are lots of, it's lovely words. It's really impressive, but I'm not sure that it has the substance to support the state of Oregon, the Department of Forestry, and the services that we need. I'm truly concerned about how I'm going to serve my county and the state of Oregon. Sorry about having to get so passionate about it, but
No, I appreciate both your passion and your concern. Do you want me to take a crack at it and you clean up, or you want to go first? Clean up my mess. So for one, we take great pride at ODF and at State Forests for the revenue that we produce that funds our operations, as well as provides tremendous, benefit to the counties that receive and the local tasking districts. Great pride. I take personal pride that my salary is not funded with tax dollars; it's funded with timber dollars. So I want to be really clear about that. My history here is unique. It's mine. I came on in 2012 in the midst of the Elliott State Forest lawsuit, which recall was a productive forest by every means of the word, and provided great economic benefit to Coos and Douglas counties, and has not provided said benefit for almost 10 years now as a function of endangered species lawsuits. That had a big effect on my thinking about future risk. I also have spent 25 years in the Pacific Northwest working on timber and wildlife conflict resolution, and learned a lot from the federal experience along the way. And so, you hear sometimes, oh, this is going to make them like the feds. I see it as the exact opposite. This is how we avoid that fate, the fate of the Elliott, the fate of federal lands for the last 2 decades. This is how we ensure a long-term sustainable and predictable flow of timber and all the benefits that provides. That is the fundamental premise here. And it's one that's controversial, no doubt. But I feel very strongly about it. Whether it's enough is certainly another question, right? Go ahead.
so I really appreciate that. That was very helpful. But so perhaps we need to be looking at this from our federal congressional delegation rather than just within our state. Is that where we need to be going?
In terms of some of the constraints that we face, I think that's probably, yeah. So without taking a position on any of those things, I'll say certainly, absolutely. I mean, essentially what drives a lot of our costs, and first of all, 100% with what Nick said, my entire career here, it is a source of pride. It can be a little difficult sometimes because as our expenses increase, and they're increasing for you too, and for us, and it's kind of like, okay, now what? It is a very difficult situation in terms of trying to use congressional delegation and so forth. I think that's really a wise thing to do because there's so many exogenous factors that weigh in here. And a lot of them are, a lot of the big rocks are federal policy issues as well. But then we have to realize our own increasing costs within the state as well. And, just for instance, I don't think it's any great secret for us as a division within the agency and with managing Board of Forestry lands, we're on the hook for that entire protection bill, right? And we don't get a match and we don't get an offset. And we don't get any kind of offset to the admin prorate that goes along with that. And all these things, and they really do pile up into something that is, while I would like to say that we can solve the whole thing with timber dollars, I don't think that we're going to be able to at the end of the day.
So I really appreciate, Nick, I do really appreciate what you said. And in fact, in looking at this plan, my first take was that it was so bland and so high level, I couldn't do much to it. But as I read it, I do walk away saying that the goals and objectives as laid out there, I totally support. The comments about the economic piece, I received a copy of a letter from the governor to some coastal legislators that she talks about a old design economic model. What worries the heck out of me is that old design economic model is millions of dollars that come to us through the county payments. But forget that. And I wish I could get people to understand that that's not the biggest dollar. The biggest dollar is the actual job. So the money that comes to me in taxes that comes from that comes from me from revenue is much smaller than the impact of all those jobs, those mills. And then I have paper mills. I have people building things, furniture. I have all these things that are created. And as I watch us push our ecological problems on the rest of the world, as we continue to say, Oregon's gonna cut back here, cut back here, cut back here. Yet I always thought of us, in fact, I know that I think of us as being a leader in what we can do in terms of management. And we're increasing their imports of wood from around the world. I don't think Colombia, Brazil, Russia, I don't think they have that they care much about that ecological future. And it scares me. So one is the whole economic issue. It isn't just about the money I receive as a portion of the sale. It is the fact that I have so many mills, so many operations that are related, whether it be toilet paper for Costco out of Harrisburg, or is it we're now getting ready to produce diesel gas in Lebanon, and we're getting ready to produce natural gas in Albany out of wood waste. If I don't have those jobs, that's much, much bigger than the revenue. And then the model worries me because when she calls it an outdated model, I'm sorry, when the governor, apologize, calls it an outdated model, I want to be careful because there isn't any new revenue stream coming to the state of Oregon. It is basically our income taxes coming there. That if in fact I lose money to schools, that's less money
available to that school, but there's equalization. Well, that takes the pool of money and divides it up. So when Lynn County suffers some, it turns out every school in the state suffers some. And when it comes to different departments, I look at each one of those issues, and all I see is as we decrease this, and the Board of Forestry and the department cannot operate, has to cut staff or get money from the state, that's in conflict and in competition with me, because I'm worried about mental health. I'm worried about so many other things that come to me from states as requirement that come with some revenue. And oftentimes, I know you probably don't care to hear this, but oftentimes I'm asked to do something by the state. We sign a contract, but a few years later, I don't get the revenue. I don't get the money. I don't get the same level of support. And so when I see us planning to drive what was a self-sustaining operation into one that needs this tax from sales taxes or from whatever new tax revenue source is going to come, it scares me, because I don't know if Oregonians will support a sales tax. I don't know what's going to happen. And I worry that, as I appreciate how much you are and how great you are at fighting fires, as I appreciate the fact that you are in fact doing, I think, very advanced forest management compared to some other states, and certainly compared to other countries in the world, I worry about the income impact of this plan. And thank you.
So my generation calls this document an exercise in vague booking. I mean, it's a vague Facebook post, but it's an entire document. And I recognize why the document is vague. It provides protections so that lawsuits won't be filed against the Department of Forestry. I can respect that. I wish that there was more economic reflection throughout the document and economic dedication. All of previous commissioners' concerns I echo. I look at our current housing crisis that we're in the middle of, and so $900 million last year was spent in Oregon on importing wood products. And so if Oregon's looking to further reduce our wood product production, I feel like that number is only going to go up, and the environmental impact of importing additional woods because we've chosen to not produce them ourselves is not going to move the needle in the direction that everyone wishes to move the needle. And so not only that, it's going to be a fiscal impact when the department can't no longer pay their own bills. So the general fund's going to have to pay your bills, and that'll be $120 million every other year. And that doesn't include the loss to the counties. And so that's $120 million coming away from mental health, from schools, from other social services in Oregon. And so that's why, like, environmentally speaking, I truly believe that our coho and our miralets need protections. And I'm speaking for Clatsop County because those are our two species of major interest. But then I look down Highway 202 at fish pipes that are plugged or inaccessible to fish that are immediately adjacent to the river. And so I look at the burden of this department trying to solve environmental issues when other departments and other agencies don't. And you're not going to solve it as a department. As we've seen by the federal model, they haven't solved it. So I recognize your efforts. I can respect your efforts, but until the entire state jumps onto this train and starts fixing all of these fish pipes and culverts down the actual river, like, it doesn't matter what happens up the hill and in the forest because the fish actually just can't get there. And so I guess I'm just reflecting on the frustration that this agency is trying to fix something that until everybody jumps on board and every other agency jumps on board, it's unfixable. And we've burdened the state of Oregon by doing it. And we've burdened our taxpayers by doing it. And if you want me to take you out in the field, whoever's online, and show you every fish pipe that is inaccessible directly adjacent to the Columbia River, and all the other offshoots and all the other sloughs, I will. So, thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Freeman, I saw your hand up once. Did you want to make a comment?
Oh, David, I better not. I'll just,
I trust you.
okay,
Ask a question about this slide here.
since you asked twice, this plan continues to talk about all this great stuff, and several of the commenters have mentioned how, it's really not too in the weeds, which is probably smart for the plan. But when we start talking about forest and fire, the whole conversation started about fire. There's simply three things that cause fire, right? It's oxygen, heat, and fuel. This plan and continued plans around whether it's federal or state lands generates more fuel. There's never a consideration of the only thing we can manage as it pertains to fire is the fuel. We're not going to eliminate the oxygen from the planet. Some people say it's getting hotter, so there's more heat. So fuel is really where our focus should be. And I've heard nothing today, nor do I see anything in any of the state or federal land managers' recognition that they could help this incredible fire problem we're having by removing some fuels. So anyway, that's all I was going to say. It seems very simplistic when you say it that way, but when we talk about habitat and recreation and all these other things, none of that works when our forests are burning up. None of it. So if we don't start thinking about removing some fuel, and I mean, not nipping around the edges of doing these little projects, but actually having forest plans that remove the amazing amount of fuel that grows every year in these forests, we're never going to get ahead of it. Anyway, I can go on and on. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Nick, I just had a question about this slide. A key thing on, through these different planning processes is trying to figure out what the change is from past plans. And so I see here, there's things like riparian conservation areas, habitat conservation areas, which are actually part of the HCP. And so not really forest management plan specific. So what I'm curious is what on this slide actually constitutes a change from the way, actually from the previous kind of the current forest management plan that we're under.
Good question. So, I mean, yeah, most conspicuously, it would be the left piece there, sort of how we're addressing, fish and wildlife habitat components of GPV changes from, the current plans strategies of desired future condition complex with terrestrial anchors to this. But in many ways, it's like, the concepts themselves sort of are overarching, and then it's like, which plan fits into, you sort of fit the plan to the concepts, I guess I would say.
Right. So the left box, though, the how your strategies around threatened and endangered species comes through the HCP. Is that right? So the key changes here are is the introduction of the HCP.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying that the FMP otherwise doesn't change management on the lands from what the current FMP does. It's in fact the HCP that is changing.
No, I don't think that's what, I don't disagree. I guess I disagree. We're managing for some of the same components or, concerns, values, whatever, et cetera. But differently in different parts of the landscape now. It's sort of, you get to a similar place through different commitments, I guess. I don't know. Anybody else want to take a crack at that?
That's the question, right? Is what that difference is. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that are kind of, updated here. And I think the core components and the things addressed, I think most of it is actually recognized in the current plan. There's a little bit different approach. I'll agree with that. But I think in order to stay on time, maybe we should kind of burn through the rest of it. No pun intended. The rest of this presentation so that we can make sure we get the modeling timeline out there and folks understand that too.
So I do see that Commissioner Freeman put up his favorite background. Thank you for that, Tim. Go ahead.
Okay, next slide. I'll try and move through these then relatively quickly. We'll just jump to the goals. you know, and so basically, how does that translate onto the landscape? You have these different sort of emphasis areas, and you know, we're trying to then fit, and we also have this existing land management classification system, the FLMCS, and so sort of fitting this new landscape framework into that FLMCS is going, you know, our approach moving forward. So specific management strategies to increase resilience and other trade-offs and will vary across the landscape depending on the specific emphasis of the particular area as designated by the FMP or the HCP or the Forest Land Management Classification System itself. That Forest Land Management Classification System, which is an acronym, I guess I wish we could simplify. It's defined in Oregon rule, and it's intended to address the appropriate range of management activities that will apply to a particular area of the land base. And so it lends well to this framework. So, I mean, basically just to like speed things up, the notion here, then, if you look at, you know, on state forest lands, timber revenue funds the majority of our management. These funds are also the primary vehicle for providing economic benefits to rural communities. Emphasis on production-oriented goals and the related silvicultural strategies therefore take priority on a significant portion of the landscape. And so production of timber will be the primary objective in most of these general stewardship lands. Important to note that general stewardship lands managed for timber also provide for other ecosystem services such as clean water and wildlife habitat. The high value conservation areas of the FLMCS are already defined. These are areas intended to be managed for specific conservation values. And so the conservation areas of the HCP fold into that land management classification. There's also focused stewardship and special use areas. These have, this is where sort of one or more resources require heightened or focused awareness, or where the land is designated for a specific use. And so examples are cultural resource and recreation sites, and on the special use Tillamook Forest Center. To be clear, the recreation, education, and interpretation program is then interwoven throughout the landscape and across all the emphasis areas. The differences among those emphasis areas provides for diverse activities and experiences, as well as opportunities to educate the public about sustainable working forests and functional forest ecosystems. And in this framework, the types and proportions of services that any given acre contributes depends on landscape context, but the forest as a whole provides for the full suite of services that the public demands.
That's a quick question.
Next slide.
I was just curious. So revenue production seems to be a goal here, but are there any emphasis areas for revenue production?
Yeah, and so the general, so we have, you know, we're going to have these conservation areas. Those will fold into the HVCAs and focused stewardship. There's previously designated focused and special use. The rest of the landscape is general under that classification system. Those lands would be, the emphasis on those lands is going to be timber production. Yeah. And that's not to say that there's not timber harvest occurring on the other lands. It's just the emphasis in those lands is in fact timber. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is Jim Kelly. I'd like to break in here because I've a whole lot of great testimony, but for those of us online, I am clueless as to who is saying what. So if people could please say your name every time someone comes in and says a comment, it will really help us, those of us who are online. Thank you.
Well, I guess, you know, I was gonna ask or request, this is Commissioner Banks, there's been a reduction in million board feet produced in the state of Oregon just within the last year, about a 20% reduction under the new, I don't know, working under the new rules of an HCP that hasn't been approved yet. And my curiosity is I would like to see what it's going to look like for my community, but also for the state of Oregon, if we add the new FMP rules in joined with the HCP, because, you know, I circle back to the leaf tree rules, the average of 5 in the current FMP versus the 2 leaf trees per acre in the HCP. And so that in itself, just a very simple rule, is going to have a different result on our state forests, and on our economics for my community. And so I would like to see a graph or a modeling that says what this is going to look like. We already know what it's going to look like with the HCP, but I'd like to know what it's going to look like with the HCP and the FMP and any other plans all working together at once. Thank you.
So
Nick, I just want to make a comment on that. I think that would be important also for the Board of Forestry.
yeah,
Really
absolutely. And we have on the agenda the update on our progress towards that very goal. Well, those goals related to the providing economic information to the board to inform their decision.
And I'd love it before they have to vote to approve the HCP, please. And thank you.
Okay, next slide. So we thought it would be helpful to put these notion of emphasis areas and the FLMCS into a visual graphic to help conceptualize. So this is just conceptual. It's intended to provide a hypothetical example of how these emphasis areas might look on the landscape. Figure on the left shows the riparian conservation areas, and in the upper left corner in yellow, a hypothetical habitat conservation area. And then the rest of the ground between would be general ground where there's production emphasis. And the circles represent different types of harvest that it's occurring across the landscape. You can see there's both regeneration harvest and thinning occurring inside and outside of the conservation areas or the habitat areas, not the riparian. Right side of the figure is just showing how recreation, education, and interpretation resources overlay on top of that. And so same landscape, you've got dispersed campsites and OHV and hiking and other trails sort of moving across emphasis areas. And then a couple examples of special use and focused use. You've got day use areas, Jones Creek and Smith Homestead day use, and the Tillamook Forest Center there. Next slide. So I'll move through the goals pretty quickly because we're running short, I'm told. So the Oregon administrative rule requires that the plans speak to several resources and provide goals and strategies for said resources. It lists them. Here we have those plus a couple that we heard from the public during the initial scoping were important. And so we elevated those. And so I think this is 13, if I recall correctly. Yeah. 13 separate resources: timber, transportation, no particular order here, timber, transportation, cultural and historical resources, REI, visual, special forest products, mining, ag, and grazing, which isn't currently or historically a very large use of our land base, but it exists and it's in rule. Soils and geology, carbon, air quality, aquatic and wildlife habitat, and sensitive plants. Next slide. Hopefully I've got the right stuff here. So I'll spend a few minutes just walking through each of the actual goals in the plan. There's too many strategies to do the same here, but I'll finish with an example using the strategies for the timber resource. Again, no particular order here, and there are multiple goals for some resources, but not all. And so here you can see the goals for timber and transportation. Maybe I won't read the whole thing. For timber, though, the goal is to provide a sustainable and predictable supply of timber that provides for economic opportunity, jobs, and availability of forest products. Next slide, please. There are 3 goals associated with cultural and historic resource protection. And so the first is around tribal access and use. Basically saying that we will coordinate with the federally recognized tribes. The second is around tribal cultural resource protection. And the third is around historical cultural resource protection. And there, you're good. Next slide. You're already there. Okay, and then the goal for recreation, education, and interpretation, create meaningful and enjoyable experiences that foster appreciation and understanding of state forest land, contribute to community health, sustainable working forests, and economic well-being. There are goals for visual resources and for special forest products. Next slide, please. Like I said, mining, ag, admin, and livestock raising. The goal for soil and geology, maintain natural soil processes, protect soils from damage, and increase soil carbon and other nutrients. Carbon goal listed below. I'm happy to go back to any of these. Next slide. Air quality, aquatic and riparian resources, drinking water, wildlife. And let's just go straight to the strategy example. And so recall the goal for the timber resources, provide a sustainable and predictable supply of timber that provides for economic opportunity, jobs, and availability of forest products. And then the strategies we'll employ to achieve this goal are to, 1, determine a sustainable harvest objective during IP development and complete this harvest objective with predictable year-to-year timber supply over the life of that IP. Implement a timely response to natural disturbances to salvage merchantable timber based on the management emphasis of the affected area and operational policy. And in general stewardship land, silvicultural prescriptions will be designed for sustainable timber production and economic performance, whereas in habitat conservation areas, prescriptions will be designed for resilient wildlife habitat. So this is a strategy around the silviculture itself for both management and stand development.
Will Tucker from Lynn County. So
yeah,
thank you so much. As you gave those examples, a couple things strike me. One, when it talks about scenery values, I would trade a job for scenery values any day in the week. In fact, I actually take pride in driving through the canyon and seeing that patchwork of regeneration occurring and seeing that piece. And if someone's telling me that we're going to set some areas aside for scenic reasons, I'd rather see us do something different. But when I looked at the goal back about sustainable harvest objectives, predictable year-to-year timber supply is a great one, but I would love, and again, it goes back to some of the proposals we made about what models to use for modeling. I would love to have that include something about maximizing the volume, about looking at sustainable yields as a net growth of timber equals 0, that we are actually harvesting in these areas that we can regenerate, that we can thin, that we're actually harvesting in a way, because with that goal, not including a volume or an input to the, or a reflection of the need of the communities to have these jobs and mills, and the reflection of the community and the nation needing the timber products we produce, that objective might lead, and I think it has led and is leading us down a path to decrease our timber objectives and decrease our values because we don't think we can do something. And that was I think the goal behind the proposal we had made around the HCP, where we thought there was more volume available in this same area and can still meet the goals. So I look at this goal, the top one, and I have a hard time with it in that I would hope that we could do both. Yield, output, as well as improve the environment. Thank you.
I guess what I'm seeing is an HCP that is writing an FMP for us. And I had hoped at the beginning of all of these conversations that the HCP would be the environmental leg of the stool, but instead it's bleeding over into the economic leg of the stool and the social leg of the stool. And so our stool appears to be going to fall down. When we look at the sustainable harvest objective of the current IPs that were released, I don't know, timeframe, I don't know. That's not sustainable for my community. It's not sustainable for our mills. It's not sustainable for jobs. And so I fear that we have a plan that, and I'll say it, I'll own it, was poorly written. And I'm not against having an HCP, but this whole process is being built on something that a house of cards that is going to fall down. And it looks like an operational crap show when you take into account, you'll also have private lands and you guys, so many rules that don't match up. And it's going to boil down to even more being taken away from our counties. And you've mentioned having this, financial model being outdated or whatnot, having had the governor state that, and this financial model was working up until this point. And it's been working very well to the pride of many. And I wish that we could go backwards and look at these communities as individuals and write an HCP for these communities that were reflective of this community's needs instead of being punitive. And I will say it to Clatsop County, because Clatsop County is going to take it in the chops. And everybody else, yeah, I agree, it's difficult, but so when a sustainable harvest objective written under the guidelines of an HCP with an FMP that is reflective of even more environmental dedications, and I get it, I understand, like I'm not anti-environment at any stretch of the imagination, given my rant in regards to the coho and fish pipe passability. But yeah, I would like to see more social and economic reflections in this FMP plan that drives the lands outside of the HCAs towards economic profitability, because our recreation depends on it. Our campgrounds depend on it, our jobs depend on it, and our mills depend on it. So thank you.
Sorry.
Great. Tyson Weprick, for the record, I'm the adaptive management specialist at State Forests. I'm going to talk about the adaptive management guidelines specifically, and then go into the adaptive management plan and board performance measures, which are separate from the FMP. So, and also feel free to interrupt me if you have questions, but I'll try to be brief and respect your time. So in rule, adaptive management is defined like this. It's a process by which we improve our management through monitoring the outcomes of the FMP strategies in a scientific manner. And so the guidelines outline what that looks like in terms of decision-making and monitoring. One key difference between the current FMP and this draft is that we described adaptive management as a tool within the broader scope of decision-making. And the reason for this is that we want to define the steps for making a decision and the role of monitoring beforehand, So we don't just monitor for the sake of monitoring. We want all of our information to be gathered with a purpose in mind, and that's improving our management. Structured decision-making is the predominant process in natural resource management for this. That might be a new term, but I think you all are familiar with decision-making processes in general. The steps of structured decision-making are adapted from business decision-making, and I think they'd be pretty familiar to you all. And so adaptive management has been primarily used for decisions where there's scientific uncertainty. Structured decision-making acknowledges that we have different values. It talks about group deliberation and analyzing trade-offs. So not just thinking about monitoring as a scientific exercise in isolation. Let's see. And so let's do this slide. The adaptive management plan is separate. And thanks to Stephanie or Samantha for printing these out. But at your desk, there's the adaptive management plan for state forest management, as well as an appendix to that, which is the performance measures. These are both drafts that I wrote to accompany the draft forest management plan. They're outside of the FMP because it needs to be a living document. Our monitoring is going to be updated all the time, and new results are going to be coming in and being reported, and we need to be flexible to be able to use that information. So I see these drafts as sort of marching orders for me going forward under the new FMP and how monitoring will be organized for all these different processes. And I'm happy to, you can email me feedback, you can tell me feedback if you have any. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Brandon Persinger, Association of Oregon Counties. For these performance measures, you know, for the department, performance measures typically go through the legislature and the legislature has to approve them. For the performance measures for this, would they go before the board for approval? And if so, what is the timeline?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this is Tyson again. Yes, so we have Oregon legislature key performance measures, and we're not changing those. We're still reporting those to the legislature. The board performance measures in September, it's an informational item. I imagine there'll be discussion, feedback, what the draft looks like may change, and but they'll be adopted with the adaptive management print plan as I believe a separate item from the FMP, but at the same time. Yes, we can go to the next slide. This figure is in the FMP. It breaks down inside the center box the role of the adaptive management plan and kind of the three purposes. On the left, you have the inputs. So decision support requested by different entities, performance measures that would be adopted by the board, and habitat conservation plan requirements. It's a special bubble because of the monitoring requirements. There are a lot of them that need to be coordinated and reported to the services. On the right, you have decision recommendations. So adaptive management isn't making decisions. It is presenting alternatives to decision makers at the appropriate level, which could be the board. It could be Mike Wilson. It could be in collaboration with services if we're thinking about adaptive management for covered species. So the monitoring will provide decision recommendations. And we can go to the next slide. So the board performance measures are a select set of metrics that the board uses to evaluate the management outcomes to see if the FMP strategies are working. These performance measures listed have specific components that will be monitored and reported with targets or acceptable ranges designated by the board. And while these performance measures don't encompass all aspects of our monitoring and reporting, the purpose is to provide an up-to-date dashboard for the board and the public to track management outcomes over time across a range of key ecosystem services. And these have been developed with board feedback throughout this year. They've gone through some internal revision as well. They've gone to state partners, and presenting them at the board in September is we're soliciting more feedback. And sorry, if you are online and you don't have the printout, the adaptive management plan and performance measures will be in the board packet that comes out later this month. Yes.
So thank you, Will Tucker. So I sit on the Adaptive Management Program Committee. So how does that work tie into this piece? Because as I look through your table of contents here, I have not had a chance to read this yet. I don't see it talking about the research being done. I don't see it talk about the research that's supposed to be done to guide us making recommendations to the board. I did not, going back to your chart about decision making, I don't see that body referenced at all.
Yeah, this is a great question and a key point of clarification. So the Adaptive Management Program Committee that you serve on is informing the Private Forest Accord, and it's more formal than this adaptive management plan in the sense that those are public meetings. And this plan is specific to state forests and this forest management plan. I'm, keeping up with your meetings in the Adaptive Management Program Committee. I'm keeping up with the research that you all are deciding to pursue for the Private Forest Accord, but there's not necessarily, it's not defined how our adaptive management program listens to them.
Okay, I would just encourage you to not create a separate, different body, because if we're looking at the private timber and it completely surrounds the state forests, it would make sense that research and work done on the Private Forest Accord should inform and help guide the work that's being done on the state forests around it. Just my thought.
Yeah, and this is Tyson again, and I agree with you that research will be important for us as well as other landowners.
The management plan for private forest lands and whatever else in state. So are you on, it appears to me you're on different tracks then. So yours is the state forest land adaptive management plan seems to be much further along than the state adaptive management plan for forests. Is that what you see, Commissioner?
So no, I don't think we're further along. We're just beginning to do literature research on a couple possible questions. We're just starting to do educational pieces to inform us as a body to get us to have some same grounded background of information. So I don't know, and not seeing an actual formal, I mean, I would have loved to seen the slide back one where you actually had an input from the MC as a planned input into your work. I think that they are connected. In fact, if you came across a question that you thought was in a geographical area and made sense, like eastern steep slopes for road management, you could look at and review or request from AMC that we spend some OSU resources and money to do that research. So I see them as being disconnected as presented today. I see them saying it's not disconnected, that there is some connection, but I see them as being disconnected and would not want them to be connected. They need to be more formally connected, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. This is Tyson again.
Commissioner Banks, real quick.
Well,
We're behind schedule here.
we're behind schedule and so I had three very specific things I wanted to discuss about the actual MP document, FMP document.
And we will get to that
soon, but to comment on Commissioner Tucker's statements. I feel like the FMP, the HCP, this adaptive management, the PFA. I recently spoke to an operator that lives in my community, owns. It's a complete, and I will say it in public, a shit show when it comes down to somebody who operates on state land, somebody who operates on private, and he's a contractor, and so in a trucking company and cuts timber, and so we've created a giant mess for these people that is going to guarantee someone's going to screw up. And so I guess I'm asking for communication between the state and private and maybe press pause on what the state is doing on state lands and let PFA figure their stuff out and then come in. But having all of these conversations happening across the state in multiple agencies is just creating a mess. And I will not say that person's name out loud, but he's shown up for public comment a few times, and we're creating a horrible mess for these timber companies. So anyhow, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Commissioner. Back over to you, please.
Okay, Tyson Weprick again for the record. These performance measures, I appreciate all your comments there so far. These performance measures were developed with board feedback. Targets or acceptable ranges for different components are not set by the board yet. And we'd expect the FMP modeling outcomes and a socioeconomic report that we present to the board to provide a starting point for them to quantify targets. Let's see, and performance measures, they're intended to be a place where FTLAC can advise the board on which components are most important to trust counties. We can go, okay, and these are in your packet in front of you, the performance measures with different components. They're in alphabetical order in the packet. In the slides, I've grouped them into different things. These three relate to our forest development. They all rely on our forest inventory, which is based on ground measurements and LiDAR. And we'd expect targets for these to vary by emphasis areas as well. They'd be informed by FMP modeling outcomes and future IP modeling. But we want to make clear that harvest volume itself is in rule not set by the board. This slide describes social and
Can I interject on the previous slide,
Sure.
please? So if you flip back to the carbon storage situation, I did not see any reflection of what happens after wildfire and what happens to that carbon storage after wildfire. And so I hope that we can input what happens after wildfire on that carbon storage.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Chair, this is Mike Buffo.
Yes, go ahead. Yes,
You mentioned that by rule, the harvest volume isn't set by the board. And I'm curious, so though harvest volume would be a performance measure here. And so I'm curious about the sort of the consequences of not achieving the harvest volume performance measure. Assuming that the performance measure is the same volume as whatever volume is set by this forester.
Right, and this is Tyson again. So that would relate to, any target of any component, like what would happen? And, my vision of targets is that they're informed by the modeling outcomes. We expect to meet them. We expect to be within acceptable ranges for all these different targets. But as with any sort of forest land management, there are trade-offs between different resources. There might be one target that we miss. I don't see that as throwing off everything else. It's where we look at how one target plays in with all these other resources that we're managing. And so even though the board wouldn't set a harvest volume, we think that's an important thing to present as a component of a performance measure that for the board and the public.
Commissioner Tucker, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. So Will Tucker, one more time. Page 10, you talk about harvest inventories, and you talk about the fact that the intent of this performance measure is to demonstrate how planned harvest volumes, blah, blah, blah. And then it says over time, inventory growth should meet or exceed harvest volumes. And in the last few dozen years that I've been a commissioner, only a little over a dozen, we've actually had inventory volumes exceed and grow over the volume of management. And so over cuts. So that statement, I would love to have it say over time, harvest volume should meet or exceed harvest growth. I mean, somehow they need to be closer because we are already today producing many more millions of board feet of timber than we are in our harvest volumes. It's upside down from the way you wrote this. This is written to me as if we were not harvesting some timber and we weren't growing a lot of timber.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So I think when I was writing these, I was thinking of, all emphasis areas together. And I think, so I've presented on carbon storage to the board last year, and using the ground data, carbon storage in above ground trees is growing on state forest lands across all of our different emphasis areas. That's been a trend that's been shown over the last 10 years. And so I think that gets to your point that we're growing more than we're harvesting in terms of carbon. So I think that would continue when you consider all emphasis areas. When you consider general ground, I'm not sure if my wording in those performance measures is accurate. So I'll take a look back at that, because the general ground, maybe the harvest level taken out would meet growth. But I'm not sure exactly. So
when you look at carbon, make sure you, this is Will Tucker, make sure you look at the carbon life cycle and don't just look at what's there on the ground as above and below ground. Look at it as furniture, look at it as houses, look at it as stored timber for a long period of time, stored carbon, I'm sorry, for a long period of time. But I do think overall, in totality, the state forest lands is growing millions of board feet of timber. And I'm looking to have that, the harvest levels grow as well.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Buffo.
Just your consultant, not Commissioner Buffo, just Mr. Buffo.
Did I say Commissioner? You've been taken down a notch there, Mike.
Just a follow-up question. So Tyson, you mentioned that. So in the last 10 years, there's been a growth of carbon on the land base. Since the Tillamook burn, has there ever been a 10-year period where there's been a decline of carbon on the land base?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Yes.
Commissioner Banks here. So there's a lot of conversation in regards to diversity and creating diversity, but shown in the plan, it shows that we're already diverse by 63% of all of our land base. Is that correct? And so I guess why are we so focused on diversity of classes and composition and stand structure? It's just a curiosity. I mean, because it shows that we're 63% of the state forest is already diverse. And so are we going for 100%? Like what's happening here?
Yeah, are you thinking about the adaptive capacity?
Well, so I'm talking about the FMP plan as a whole. There's a lot of reflection on stand diversity and focus on diversity, and that word is used a lot throughout the FMP as a whole. And so I was just curious, I mean, why?
Yeah, I think that's beyond my answer or my level to answer.
That's fine. I'm putting it out there. Thank you.
Yeah, like one element of that, a couple elements. One, so we get a lot of criticism or sort of assumptions from some members of the public that we have even age monocultures, single species, Doug fir, our whole forest is Doug fir, and that we're managing for more Doug fir. And then we hear concerns about the resilience of said forests, the concern that in the face of climate change and increased fire severity, all those monocultures are going to go poof. So then the second part is the science today is generally encouraging diversity as part of promoting resilience and sort of hedging bets for the future. We're not going to make it we're as diverse as possible and more diverse like that. The goal isn't that. The goal is to be really thoughtful about what a resilient forest for the future might look like.
So, and I agree with that. And I now understand why the verbiage is so focused on it. But this is Commissioner Banksy, and what I'm curious about is we've locked ourselves into an HCP for 70 years and we're stuck on the diversity of the said forests within those HCAs. If we have a major climate change situation, Doug fir is not going to be the tree of choice for the North Coast, but yet we've reserved these areas. Then without thinking of our future and without flexibility of our future to pivot if we need to pivot. I'm not saying to say we're going to need to pivot, but if we need to pivot, we can't. And so we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure is just a thought. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to say adaptive management to the rescue, but
Well, yeah, or in a case like that, in a major shift like that, it would be adaptive management of a sort, but adaptive management outside of the cycle that's accomplished within the HCP and ends up being an amendment to that for that kind of change. Yeah.
yeah. So these social and economic performance measures are in different stages of how we collect the data and our ability to do so. So you all are well aware of probably the first two bullet points. We report those every year. Economic opportunities, we're providing a socioeconomic analysis to the board along with the FMP modeling outcomes. And that'll be kind of our baseline expectations for what jobs and wages in timber and other industries would be provided in different FMP modeling scenarios. For REI, recreation, education, and interpretation, I think instead of saying annual counts, I think it's written in the document as more visitor use and interests, and making sure we're aligning visitor interests with the opportunities we're providing in the REI program. And with community engagement and public support, this is something that we've used surveys in the past. In conversations with board members, we're generally relying on a lot of the survey work that the board is pursuing statewide and local that will inform how we're seeing our community engagement and public support. But I feel like that could also change over time. It's just something that we are not committing right now to costly surveys before we have a baseline from what the board has been surveying recently.
So Tyson, before you leave this slide, as you look at the economic opportunities, job wages, timber and other industries, I would suggest that you maybe reach out to Idaho or Washington, where the numbers they use for the economic impact, the number of jobs that are tied to 1 million board feet are 3 and 4 times, at least double what we use in Oregon or ODF used in Oregon. So I would just encourage you to look to maybe not adopt what was looked at when they did the HCP, but maybe do a little broader research on what that multiplier might be. Because I contend, and I think others contend, it's way, way understated in the HCP. Okay, thank you.
This is Mike. We will be, this economic analysis is different than what was done for the draft EIS. That belongs to the feds. This belongs to us. And so we will be working with our folks and the state economists to come up with all the classifications, all the codes that capture more than what was captured in the draft EIS.
So thank you so much for responding, but that makes me have one more reason to not trust the HCP, because part of that look should be some reflective. I think the people on the Board of Forestry might think that reflects what's happening to our economy. It's not going to doesn't reflect what's going to actually happen to our economy. I would just encourage that if you had a chance, that maybe you add a second number to the HCP that says, here's some number that some agency in the Fed side gave you per million board feet, but here's a number that's being looked at and used by other states or other companies there's such a diversity in those numbers, and Oregon is the one you've used is so far down at the bottom, it does not reflect what's actually happening in Oregon. And so I apologize, but that makes me even have more concerns about the HCP, not less.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's see. So I think there's one more slide and then I'll pass it over to Mike, but there are two performance measures that are related to monitoring that would be done under a draft HCP, under aquatic habitat and terrestrial habitat, with different components that we'd be already reporting under the monitoring for the HCP. And so the intention with these performance measures, again, is to get feedback from you all. We'll get feedback at the September board meeting. And I think one use of the performance measures, if they're meant to inform the board, is to present them alongside FMP modeling outcomes in the future. So that's the direction that I'm heading with them. Yes.
Commissioner Banks.
So in the FMP, but also up here, there's something called transportation impacts. And frankly, I feel like transportation or our road system is also positive for the environment. Fire response, I never want to hear we had to open roads in order to respond. Having had that said in print for I'm not sure what news article or what fire it was this year, but I never want we had to open roads in order to respond, written down for our state lands. So I will say I don't like the icon system of the FMP. I feel like it's missing a lot of balls, especially in regards to transportation. I feel like there are environmental perks to transportation that need to be highlighted within the FMP, but also here, because our road system is very careful. You guys are very careful about delisting roads that could be of concern and moving roads that could be of concern in conjunction to harvest paying for that road to move. And so I just want to say having transportation only have a negative impact or being highlighted as a negative within our state forests bothers me, but also so does your icon system, because I feel like you're missing a lot of balls in the FMP when you're using those icons to pigeonhole topics. So anyhow, thank you.
All right, thanks for that. I think that's all I have on the performance measures. Again, you are welcome to email me with feedback. Yes.
Would you make sure you send out your email address? Because I don't believe I have it. For me to give you feedback, I need to get that. Otherwise, poor Mike Wilson has to be my translator.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I'll hand it off to Mike, or sorry, Ron.
Actually, Mike, if you can get the email addresses to me, I can send it out to all of the Trust County commissioners. So that would be greatly appreciated.
All right. For the record, Ron Zilli, Deputy Division Chief for State Forest, just going to give a quick update on where we're at with our modeling. We've been working really hard on this. We know how important it is to have confidence in the analysis to support the forest management plan. So we've been really putting a lot of effort into this. I think you all recall we've worked collaboratively through the spring with a contract with Mason, Bruce and Gerard to improve our growth and yield functions in the model. We've currently completed a calibration run on our yield tables for what we call our regeneration tables, where a stand gets harvested in the model, replanted in the model, and grown forward in the model to a subsequent harvest. And those have been validated with the field, and the results are very positive that we're getting that refined to a level that they think reflects reality there. We're still working a little bit with the existing yield tables, like taking the stands that are already on the landscape and what the harvest and yields are supposed to be from them, at the initial harvest to calculate into that, getting really close to sending a run out to the field to do a model solution review. I shouldn't say model solution review, validate those yield tables probably within the next 7 to 10 days. And then we're going to be finalizing, all of the yield tables in the model and then doing a calibration run to send out to the field to get that validation. And then once we have that calibration run, we'll be doing what you see here on the slide of the 4 different harvest scenarios. So currently our plans are based on what we call a non-declining even flow of volume. So trying to get the highest level of volume we can while meeting all other plan requirements and having a relatively stable volume that doesn't decline over time. So we'll be modeling that again, and then we'll be modeling something with a longer rotation. So based on where we end up with scenario 1, then we'll extend some time on that based on what the, the rotation age is from the non-declining even flow of one, to get some longer term carbon storage information from a model run that extends those rotations out farther just from comparative purposes. And we'll also be modeling scenarios 3 and 4, which focus more on economics. And then we're looking at the third scenario as net present value, even flow of timber, looking at, how we can basically think about cash flow over time, but with more of an even flow, how to maximize the cash flow with relatively even. When I say relatively even, like fluctuations of approximately 15% per model period. So it's not consistent, not totally flat. And then the fourth scenario is looking at maximizing, net present value, but doing that with what we have called a departure scenario, for instance, something that would not have that constraint of a 15% normalization of volume between periods, where the model could look at opportunities to improve the value of the volume coming off the forest through possibly liquidating, older stands first, then similar to how that was modeled in the comparative analysis, where it did a lot of upfront harvesting, dipped down a little bit while their stands were growing, and then, harvested higher in subsequent periods towards the end of the model solution. So those are the 4 scenarios that we're going to be preparing. And we're going to be also looking at 2 different geographic scales. Currently all of our historical plans under the current FMP at least have been done at the district planning scale. So we're still going to model those. And then we're also going to model it a sub-geographic region, combining the North Coast districts, which are really the Clatsop and Tillamook State Forest, and then our Willamette districts and a Southern Oregon element as well for those sub-geographic regions. So we'll be able to compare the differences of aggregating those together compared to looking at the individual administrative district scales. The work is ongoing, and we're anticipating having the results of these model runs done by mid-November. That's our current best working timeline that we have. And looking forward to getting that information available to help inform the ongoing, discussions around the work. Commissioner Banks.
So just a curiosity, the new modeling that you'll be doing, will it be reflective of all of the new rules within the HCMP, including like leaf trees, slope changes, road changes?
Yes.
Because our current FMP does not reflect the HCP.
No, it's using the current FMP and HCP wholly, so it doesn't use.
But those 2 plans don't agree with each other.
You're saying the HCP and the FMP don't agree?
Our current FMP and the HCP.
No, it's not the current FMP, it's the draft FMP.
Oh, so you're modeling the draft FMP and the HCP with all of the HCP changes,
Correct.
that will be moving through, that will further reduce harvest outside of the HCAs.
It's all future planning policy work. So it's representing what the HCP implementation would look like with this forest management plan. Really, it's the forest management plan is what we're modeling, and it's accompanied with the habitat conservation plan, conservation actions.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Ron, my question for you was, why would you look at the geographic regions? What decision will be made based upon looking at it by geographic region? Because I've always thought about it only by district by district, and I know I'm combined with some of the Marion County, so I try to watch my own piece of that. But what would you gauge when you add in Polk and Benton and some of the other Willamette to that discussion?
Yeah, so it's about looking at the scale there, and the forests are in a non-uniformly regulated condition right now across the landscape, both in the North Coast as well as the other, districts that we manage. So if you look at, shortening or reducing the scale of planning to a smaller geographic footprint, and you're trying to normalize volume flow off of that land, it's going to take the existing forest conditions, age class distributions, et cetera, and then run that model to achieve, what it can get towards the model goals. If you expand that solution out to a larger geographic area, it has more information and more stands to consider in how it would, strive with harvest scenarios to still meet the goals. And it might come up with an overall higher outcome, but it might shift the geography around. So the harvests wouldn't be normalized at a district scale, but they would be normalized at a larger scale, which could produce potentially a higher overall solution.
Hold on, please.
So because and again, I apologize for thinking about only Lynn County or only Benton County or only the counties I represent, but because the revenue comes to us and flows to us based upon the cutoff of our land and only our land, decisions that we want to maybe input. So again, maybe if you're looking at the state or if we're going to try to regionalize something, I'm not sure what the goal of this is. And to spend time doing that when I'm not sure the goal is not yet of value to me, but maybe it is to the division and to the state forestry management to look at even flow. But when I think about even flow, I'm thinking about so the counties have sustainable knowledge, so the counties have some peace. And when you work at a regional flow, and my county could drop to zero, that's certainly not an even flow for me. So again, I'm not sure your objective is to by pulling things to region and you're thinking about even flow, because when I think about even flow, I'm looking at the trends of this revenue stream to my county and to each of the counties I represent.
I appreciate that. And it's really to provide that comparison. So we don't know what the answer is going to be yet. And that would inform a discussion around, is there a benefit or not to pursuing that as a implementable scenario?
Thank you. Well understood. Mike, did you want to? Commissioner Banks.
Well,
Quickly.
I will be very quick. Basically, it would take away all of Clatsop County's talking points in order to average us with the rest of the North Coast. And I find that very frustrating because Clatsop County is being nailed hard. And when you average us out with the rest of the North Coast, the picture is a little prettier and it takes away all of my talking points and all of the facts that are going to be surrounded to the impacts of my community. And so I would ask and I request that you keep us separate in geographic regions, not by geographic reasons, but district by district as you do these modeling scenarios, because that's the only way the truth is going to be highlighted. And if you average us out with Tillamook, I love Tillamook, don't get me wrong, but if you average us out with Tillamook, the impact on paper visually is going to be less. And so everybody will think that it's okay to pursue, and it's not. Thank you.
Mr. Buffalo.
Thanks, Chair.
I said Mr. Buffalo.
You did perfect. Buffalo, Mr. Bouchard. Ron, I had a couple of questions about kind of process here. So you'll have these different scenarios. This would, if you, I guess, did them all, there'd be like 8 there. And so you can look at what different harvests could be. But is that to look at the impacts of the FMP, because the board isn't actually, or I'm assuming here, isn't weighing in and selecting one of these options because they're not setting a harvest level.
No, that's correct. So we're thinking about what are the range of options that the state forester could choose to implement the plan, if adopted by the board. And that informs the board on what they could expect to see as kind of bookends, from harvest potentials under different scenarios in which the state forester could choose to implement the plan.
So I know I think the process has these model results will come out prior to the FMP being adopted. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so there'll be a range of results, though. For example, a result could have like a high amount of volume, but that might not be selected by the state forester to be what's implemented in the IP. So how will you be able to assess, and how will the board be able to assess?
Yeah, I think it's that the bookends really in there that based on the scenarios that we've run and the bookends that they present, that informs the board that over time and across the landscape, if that plan is implemented, would that range of outcomes be expected to contribute to GPV and achieve GPV for the economic elements of it and sustainable, predictable supply of timber, et cetera, while meeting the other goals? Mike, you have a comment?
Yeah, in terms of, implementation is the state forester's job. However, the board, of course, wants to set the direction for it. And so there's 2 questions. One is, even when the board sees, model docket, is this an acceptable range that this FMP can be implemented over time, regardless of adjustment? Okay, yes, meets that, check that box. Then the other part, going back to the performance measures, the board setting those performance measures to express their expectation of those outcomes. And they can change those over time. And so that's kind of how they steer it at a high level. And then it's the state forester's job, our job, to come up with implementation plans that meet those targets
So.
or trends.
So would there be a performance measure set for a harvest level prior to an IEP that sets the harvest level? So they could be different?
Wow. No, I mean, we have to have some idea of what they want. They will have to set some initial performance measure targets before we can really design an implementation plan to meet it.
Okay,
So,
so are you saying that the board doesn't set the harvest level, but they do set a performance measure that is this? Is that a signal to the state forester of what, the expectation is for what harvest level should be?
Sure, absolutely. And I want to clarify something here that's a point. The board does give direction one way or another that affects harvest levels and always has. What the board is prohibited from doing is scheduling harvest. And so when it comes to the implementation of that, that's that clear separation, right?
Okay, I feel like a point was made here today that the board doesn't set harvest level by staff here. So I just want to be clear. What you're actually saying is that the board doesn't schedule harvest. And so, but of course the board will have input on what harvest level would be. It's just not
that is
forest management plan.
That is correct. Yes, but at a high level, they do set an expectation for harvest as well as many other values.
Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like over time we might need to understand what that means a little bit better, but I'll maybe move on. I just have one last question about this modeling is that previously we heard that the federal services were interested in the results of this modeling to help inform their final EIS on the HCP. Is that still planned, and is the timing of this model, how does the timing of the release of the modeling results kind of affect that FEIS?
Yeah, so they are waiting on us. They are waiting on us to produce model results, both for the EIS and for the biological opinions.
Could you remind me like how the timeline, do you have a kind of an idea of that, how that timeline works?
With the HCP, in terms of how they process that, no, I do have a timeline. And I think if we're done with these, we can jump ahead a couple slides and I can talk about the next steps. This can be read later. Okay. Here are the key next steps. And so currently, we're putting the finishing touches on this. Well, actually, the finishing touches are on the draft. It's going to go there. And so we have released that well ahead of the board meeting, well ahead of the board materials as promised, so that people can formulate their testimony. Our next step then is the Board of Forestry. Well, we will have a meeting open to the public as well on the 22nd of August. And we'll present a lot of the same material then too. Board meeting, September 6th and 7th. Currently, I think we're probably going to have some of this stuff on each day, draft FMP on one day and adaptive management plan performance measures on another. Agenda still has to be finalized. So then we are currently, and then we'll be doing getting the modeling package together. So we're trying to figure out the exact scheduling of a board meeting in December to bring those results to the board. And of course, we will then have to, we'll have to modify the date of our FTLAC meeting to just out ahead of that, right? To be able to present that to you. And then I think really there's a lot of unknowns around your Board of Forestry direction, action, so forth there. So basically in 2024, sometime would be when the board would approve an HCP, when they would have us go forward into rulemaking and whatnot. There's a lot usually on the January agenda. And there's Operator of the Year awards and stuff like that. So probably not January, okay, but it'll be out there sometime in 2024.
This is Mike.
And
do
so
you have a timeline for the the HCP or like the draft EIS that we could kind of compare with this timeline?
No, because it's too much waiting on this. And so it's going to be, the services are going to want to see the modeled results first before they're able to move forward with finalizing an EIS or finalizing biological opinions. And I don't know their schedule. Yep.
So originally we were talking about, last we talked, Michael, you were talking about possibly a meeting end of November or early December. Seems like the timelines are slipping a little bit. Are they going to slip some? Well, I know you can't answer that, but I just feel these timelines are slipping.
Yeah, I mean, obviously our best laid plans, right? We've been slipping there for a while because we had really originally hoped to have all this figured out in June, right? But yeah, we are trying to set that date now. And so I'm going to say mid-December, early-ish. On the early-ish side of mid-December is likely when this is going to happen. And once that board date is set, I think it'll stay there. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd also like to just go ahead and while we're talking about that, we have yet to actually develop the agenda for that board meeting, but there's a place where because I know the 15
special board meeting you're talking.
Yes, for the special board meeting. There's not a regularly scheduled board meeting, business meeting after September until January. So there's that. But this would be a special board meeting, carving out, again, setting aside some extra time for you all to talk to the board and have that discussion. That I think that is a good format and one that I like to pursue. Obviously, we don't have time for it at every board meeting, but I think there are certain places where it's just really critical and I think it's beneficial for everybody.
Thank you for that. Okay. Commissioner Banks.
So I might be just verbalizing what a lot of people are thinking and have no fear of verbalizing it. But what I see is, or what I am observing is that services wants modeling so that it can prove that there is not a substantial impact on the communities that are going to be addressed, AKA Clatsop. So we have been put in a regional situation to hopefully soften the visual of that impact on my community. And then the decision, and these are just observations, it's my inside voice speaking right now, that the decision wasn't made in June because you guys couldn't find funding from legislature in order to move forward. Because part of this HCP is being able to not go bankrupt. And so this decision is being pushed off further and further and further because you need funding. Because the current plan is going to make this department go bankrupt. And it's going to devastate my community, potentially other communities. And so it's not a question. This is a statement of my observations that this decision will be continued to be pushed out until after short session. Because we are seeking a funding source, or you are seeking a funding source in order to not go bankrupt. Because part of this EIS, and I'm just reminding everybody in the room, part of this EIS is to be able to be solvent. And so legislature is going to be asked in the short session to help out an agency that up until this point has been solvent under the current financial model, a financial model that is not outdated, that has been very effective up until this point. And so I am just pointing out that I wish I could go years back in time and have this process started over, because I know we could have done better. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Sure. And I'm going to open this up to go back and let's talk about the FMP update and the adaptive management plan. And because we ask questions as we're going on. I have one question for Ron before we move on. So the Forest Grove District, are you placing that in the North Coast or the Willamette Valley?
North Coast.
North Coast. Okay. That's okay. Thank you for that.
Can I clarify
Mike?
something
Yeah,
real quick?
please.
Yeah, this is Mike. So one of the things we're doing, regardless of whether we're modeling at a geographic scale, we're going to model it the district, we're going to model it the larger geographic region. Regardless, we are keeping the accounting of how that affects any individual county as part of it. And so that is the reason we're doing it, to see the effect so that we know we don't want any one area being ignored. And it's not only for county purposes, but for our own selfish purposes. If all the harvest goes to Forest Grove and none of it's in Astoria district, how do we move our workforce around for that, right? And we'll have to deal with some of those challenges in the future anyway. But so that, I mean, that is why we're doing it, is to assess how we want to implement, how we balance the distribution of things so that we're not leaving, so that we're not totally isolating anybody. But at the same time, looking at the potential benefits of the larger area, because anytime you take a spatial constraint off of that kind of thing, what do? You get a better harvest outcome. I can't think of a situation where you wouldn't. So
if I could add to that, this is Nick Palisato for the record. So this is something we've been talking about and looking at well in advance of having developed an HCP when we were working on one of the FMP revisions. I think it was in 2016, because prior to the HCP, we were already in the solvency issue for the division is longstanding. It precedes the harvest outcomes of the comparative analysis. We looked at a number of things to assess their relative impact on financial outcomes. And one of the findings, and there's a report somewhere that Justin could point you to, one of the findings was that this geographic area, the planning area, has a high impact on financial outcomes. And so hence why we're exploring that, as opposed to, say, leave trees, which has a relatively low impact on financial outcomes relative to something like changing a planning area. So that's just for a little bit of additional context. It's not a grand scheme.
Go ahead, Mike.
Just curious, will you be providing output that shows harvest level by county for all scenarios?
Yeah, we should be able to parse that out fairly easy, just through analysis. Yes.
Okay, so I want to take us back a little bit, and we're way over time, and I apologize, but we've now heard their update on the forest management plan and a presentation on the adaptive management plan plus performance measures. I want to give this board and anyone online an opportunity to just give us some final thoughts on what you think about what's going on. And first with their hand up is Commissioner Bangs.
Shocker. So in regards to the leaf tree comment, I just want to state that that's not, that's reflective of my taxing districts when I ask those questions, because the income goes to my taxing districts. And then when we talk about how you had a downward trend of your financials, instead of just asking the state legislature a more palatable number of maybe 10 million biennially, we'll end up having to be asking legislature for 120 million, because that's your operations for 2 years. And so I feel like the direction of being more palatable in your financial requests from the state in order to support your operations would be a much better route to be pursuing versus the other situations that have been burbling across the state and legislature of departure, or not departure, but of decoupling and just straight up asking legislature to fund your department. None of those comments take care of my taxing districts. None of those ideas take care of my jobs. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at this from the taxing districts, specifically my constituents and the people that live in my community that deserve the services that are going to be cut by constantly pursuing this situation. And I don't appreciate having the ball hidden from the decision makers that would somehow make this picture more palatable. And so that's why I so appreciate the harvest question that you just asked in regards to this FMP and this HCP as my county deserves to know that information. And the decision makers deserve to know that information because I obviously can't make that decision. And the decision has been taken out of my hands. And given the last 3 years that we've had to sit and communicate about this, that I've made that abundantly obvious, my frustration. And my request is to please be transparent to our decision makers, to the board, but also to services, because there were rules set out in black and white of the obligation moving forward with this HCP, and that is being fiscally solvent and not being overly punitive to the communities that are going to be impacted. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
So Will Tucker from Lynn again. So as I think back to the 14, 15 years ago when I became a commissioner and the conversations about improving the output from state forests and getting back to blah, blah, blah. And our questions then about the growth of the timber and the fact that we felt the numbers were wrong and there should be more harvest. And then I look at today where I'm at with the FMP, which is going to lead us to some implementation plans and this modeling that might be coming. It just scares the dickens out of me because it is, as Ms. Banks, Commissioner Banks talked about, this is taxing districts. So this is schools, pools, libraries, community colleges. This is fire departments. This is jobs. And again, the number of multipliers that have been used in conversations around the creation of the HCP is so far off from any number anyone gives me from the state Oregon Department of Employment. It's so far off from looking at other states that I just worry about as this guides this conversation forward, that it somehow has the impression when it says there's engagement with FTLC that it has the support, certainly not of this commissioner. And by the way, I represent 5 counties, and I would tell you that I do hear from Benton occasionally that I don't represent Benton or Lincoln on occasions. Well, I apologize. It's the truth. Zan Ajero Commissioner Ajero is very willing to call me up and tell me that she doesn't quite agree. I understand where you're coming from, but we don't agree. But I leave here today actually more concerned about the decoupledness between the Council of the Forest Trust Lands and the Board of Forestry. And having an opportunity to have a meeting of the Board of Forestry, I would think would be tremendous. Have the opportunity to have a conversation, even if it's a social hour with a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, I don't care what's served, but having that conversation to make sure they understand the passion for what is happening to my communities and what is happening, because where my fire is today, the one that I'm worried about, and people are calling and texting me. In fact, Mike Shaw wants to talk to me. I am frustrated because that piece of property was set aside by the Forest Service to be designated as old growth, and there's no roads into it. And and luckily a ranger has given me, not a ranger, district ranger has given me permission to cut some roads and do some things into her property. But if that had been a wilderness, it would be still growing, and maybe not. I've seen some changes this year in allowing retardant and allowing crawlers into a wilderness area on the federal side. So maybe there is some change, but I leave here today more nervous about my county's economic and community and culture than I have been in my 14 years as a commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Tucker. Commissioner Magruder.
I think that when I was elected to become a county commissioner, the most important lesson that I learned was that I was to provide good governance. Good governance aside from any bias that I might have or any preconceived ideas that I might have. And I certainly think that that is our job as commissioners here, but I think it's the job of everyone who is working in a government role. And I think that the Board of Forestry, I think Chair Kelly is not on here on the call anymore. But I think the Board of Forestry needs to think about that too. Good governance is what we provide, no matter what our personal interests are. We have to look at a very big picture, and I appreciate all the information that the department is providing, and I hope that they will respond to the requests of commissioners for additional information, because without that, I don't think we can make good decisions and provide good governance. So I encourage everybody to look at the big picture. This is huge, and I agree with Commissioner Tucker that it's unsettling to, as we move forward. This is just a big decision that people are going to have to make, and take it very seriously. And I appreciate everybody's input.
Thank you, Commissioner Magruder. Let's go online. Commissioner Miller, Commissioner Freeman, any comments? Commissioner Freeman.
So I know it's been a long meeting and I won't spend much time, but the impact of these decisions that the state's making on the ability for counties to provide services and our taxing districts always seems to get lost in this discussion. And managing forest is really the history of the state of Oregon and our communities. And what we're doing now and the direction we've been going isn't working. You give me a hard time about my background. This is the aftermath of that background. My background now is the forest that was created through the Archie Creek fire. And that timber is going to stand until it finally rots and falls or burns again. This is the direction all these plans are taking us. And we can say we're making habitat or we're doing social values, but the picture behind me is really the direction we're going. We need to do something different. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Commissioner Miller, any comments at all? Vice Chair Sweet.
Thank you everyone for your patience today and working through this. My concern, in addition to what Tim suggested, what these harvest reductions will do for financing our local governments, my deepest concern lies with our citizens and with our families. We can figure out a way to somehow get funding for the local governments. But when a family head loses one of the few family wage jobs available in rural counties where they live, things really start to fall apart. Families break up. Substance abuse follows spousal abuse. Educational systems fall apart without family support. The social impact is devastating. And I don't know. Then the other concern is, the state stated that we should give priority to the cost of housing and the availability of housing and the affordability of housing. And when you take large amounts of timber harvest away from the state, we lose volumes of lumber, and supply and demand drives the prices up, makes housing across the nation less affordable. But what about housing affordability for the people that have become dependent upon wood products and timber jobs for their livelihood? Their alternative, if their skills are transferable, is probably to work in a tourism job. And if you think it's hard to afford a house and support a family on $50,000 or $60,000 a year, can you imagine which are what we get in the forest products industry? for wages. We call that a living wage. But can you imagine how you're even going to make your house payment if all of a sudden you're only earning $25,000 a year and without any benefits? So those are my biggest worries. And I don't have an answer. I think a good part of the blame, as was suggested earlier in the year, was that, or in the meeting, was that to a large extent, federal laws and state laws have impacted us adversely. But somehow we've got to minimize, and I think the HCP concept is absolutely necessary given regulations today. But somehow we've got to reduce the impact of this HCP. Certainly there must be a way. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, John. And Cal, we'll come back to you. We'll let you back clean up here. How's that? So I just want to say that, you know, I've been doing this for the 7 years that I've been a commissioner. And this is a theme that you heard me talk about when we were in Washington County and Commissioner Magruder was there, staff was there. Today, we're talking about the FMP management approach. Key themes. Economics is not one of the key themes. Emphasis areas of the FMP. Economics are not an emphasis area of the FMP. They're talking about, and great words, sustainable and predictable timber supply. And yet we have no levels except down. And this has been happening over the 7 years that I have been involved here. When we talk about it, adaptive management, again, a new social and economic impact report going to the Board of Forestry. I am glad to hear that maybe it will be substantially different than the one used in the HCP. But that doesn't help us with the work of the HCP. It does not. And that's very concerning to me. We talk about air quality with these massive fires. That's not anywhere in any of the reports that we talked about today. So I'm hearing that when this all gets rolled up into a ball and presented again to the Board of Forestry, we already have the implementation plans in place at really drastically cut levels. I'm not sure that if the board were to decide they wanted to increase harvest, if the modeling shows that we're able or should be increasing harvest, are we going to have to wait until the 2-year term of these IPs is over? I don't know. We haven't talked about that at all. Again, very concerning to me. And you've heard me say this before. Every time we get presentations from the Department of Forestry, and I'm thinking back over my 7 years as attending these meetings, the economics, the timber harvest, and the revenue going to the counties and the special districts and the Department of Forestry, that seems to lose relevance at every meeting and every presentation that we see. That's the part to me that is so concerning. And I'm still hopeful. I am that we can make some changes. I'm hopeful in the words that Chair Kelly used in the beginning. He wants to unite the Board of Forestry around the HCP. I'm hoping that means something. I don't know. I just don't know, but I am hopeful. And so I'm going to be gone soon. And yet these issues have to continue, and we need to find a path forward that is not going to be devastating to the counties and our special districts. It's not going to be devastating to the Department of Forestry moving forward. I'm not sure how we get there. I am hopeful. I remain hopeful. I'm always hopeful. Just doesn't always work out that way sometimes. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kel Mukamoto and to Mike Wilson for any final comments.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Yamamoto, and congratulations on your retirement, and thank you for your service to the state of Oregon and Tillamook County. We appreciate that. You know, these meetings are always kind of tough to go to because I hear issues that are real and are evolving. And I have seen this story for a good portion of my career. You know, I started out working at an Indian tribe, and well, I actually started working for Colorado State Forest Service, but ended up managing a forest on the Indian tribe and saw this in the microcosm, working these issues, social issues, environmental issues, and economic issues, working and how one maximize how it affects the others. I can't promise you that we will be able to solve, and I don't even think you expect that. What I hear is all the social issues and all the economic issues that a reduction in cut as due to the HCP may intend. But you know, I hear that you do want economics at a higher level and higher to speak more loudly towards that. When I read this, I had a little different take on this management plan, and you know, we do have to try to optimize a lot. We have a lot of balls in the air that we have to maintain, and certainly the value of timber harvest to communities is not. We do not minimize that, but I think maybe it's in the ways that we talk to the different groups that maybe we need to work on. So we will look at that. I know that when Jim Kelly says he's working on something, I know he is, but I can't reveal any details, what he's thinking, but he does have at his heart, he does see and has heard the concerns that groups like yourself have brought forward to the Board of Forestry, not to minimize the concerns of people who have environmental issues too. You know, when I was going to school, I was told that I was a conservationist because I was learning about forestry. And what that definition was back then was that we were being taught about the wise use and sustainability of natural resources. We continue to go by that philosophy. I think only through dialogue and working together that we will be able to get as close as possible. You know, democracy is messy, but it's what we have, and we need to be able to respect the opinions of all people. So with that, I know my crew has worked hard on this, and we don't want to act like we're indifferent. We're not indifferent. We do hear what people are saying, but we are limited in what we can do. We have to follow the law. That's my first rule with the board, with the state, with ODF. Now, what's the first rule? Follow the law, and we do have to follow that law. But yeah, as we know, there's the black, there's the white, and then there's that gray area. And it's how we work together in the gray is what determines how good we are in providing services to Oregonians. And so that's what we always try to work on and try to improve. As for conspiracies of us using the HCP, the finances department, I'm not sure what that is. There's no conspiracy there that I know of. And I just like to dispel that. But if there is an issue, please bring those forward and I will look at them. So with that, David, I'll hand that over to Michael. Is that all right with you?
Absolutely, Kelly. Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it very much.
Okay.
Mr. Wilson, you want to wrap it up for us?
I don't know if I can wrap it up. I think I don't know how I follow that. So I'd like to say thank you, everyone, for being here. Always appreciate hearing your concerns and your input. Realize that things don't move at the pace we would like them to. And that's the thing.
It is.
But yeah. Anyway, no, I don't really have anything else to add. to that. So, thank you.
Staff, anything? Mr. Persinger, Mr. Buffo?
I would only ask that, you know, a lot of stuff was shared, right, today, in regards to, both of the presentations given. You have also asked for feedback from the counties on especially those performance measures, but, if the counties provide, recommendations or suggestions or whatever, I guess my ask of the department would be, if you are unable to factor those in, if you could provide a reason as to why they can't be factored in, that would be greatly appreciated. I appreciate the opportunity to get those presentations today. So thank you very much.
Okay. With that, no further comments? ODF staff, anything? Thank you so much. Time being, wow, 1:05 PM. We will adjourn this FTLAC meeting. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you all.